So we have just ticked over to 1:30. Shall we get things rolling? So let me know when we're right to go. We're good? Okay. All right. Welcome to the 7th hearing of the Public Accountability Committee's inquiry into the appointment of Mr John Barilaro as Senior Trade and Investment Commissioner to the Americas. The inquiry is examining the circumstances leading up to the appointment of the various commissioners, including the processes, probity and integrity measures undertaken. I acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians on the lands on which we are meeting today. I pay my respects to elders past and present and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the land and waters of New South Wales. I also acknowledge and pay my respects to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. Today we'll be hearing from two witnesses, Dr Marianne Broadbent, Managing Partner, NGS Global, and the Honourable Warwick Smith, AO, a panel member for the recruitment of the Senior Trade and Investment Commissioner to the Americas. I thank both of you for making the time to give evidence to this important inquiry. Before we commence, I'd like to make some brief comments about the procedures for today's hearing. Today's hearing is being broadcast live via the Parliament's website. A transcript of today's hearing will be placed on the committee's website when it becomes available. In accordance with the broadcasting guidelines, media representatives are reminded that they must take responsibility for what they publish about the committee's proceedings. While parliamentary privilege applies to witnesses giving evidence today, it does not apply to what witnesses say outside of their evidence at the hearing. I therefore urge witnesses to be careful about comments you may make to the media or to others after you complete your evidence. Committee hearings are not intended to provide a forum for people to make adverse reflections about others under the protection of parliamentary privilege. In that regard, it's important that witnesses focus on the issues raised by the inquiry terms of reference and avoid naming individuals unnecessarily. All witnesses have a right to procedural fairness according to the procedural fairness resolution adopted by the House in 2018. If witnesses are unable to answer a question today and want more time to respond, they can take a question on notice. Written answers to questions taken on notice are to be provided within 21 days. If witnesses wish to hand up documents, they should do so through the committee staff. In terms of the audibility of the hearing today, I remind both committee members and witnesses to please speak into the microphone. Finally, could everyone please turn their mobile phones to silent for the duration of the hearing. I now welcome our first witness. Dr Broadbent, could you please state your name and your position, title in the capacity in which you are appearing today and swear either an oath or an affirmation?
Thank you. Dr Marianne Broadbent. I'm a Managing Partner of NGS Global. I was the lead search consultant for the executive search and recruitment of all of the Senior Trade and Investment Commissioners.
Thank you. You might just want to pull the microphone a bit closer to you. And then, yes, if you could do your oath or affirmation. Thanks.
Thank you. I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God.
Thank you very much. Now, would you like to start by making a short opening statement?
Yes,
Thanks
thank you very much.
Proceed.
Chair, I would. As I mentioned, my name is Marianne Broadbent. I'm a Managing Partner of NGS Global. I'd like to make an opening statement that outlines the processes NGS Global supports and make some comments in relation to specific issues that the committee has been addressing. I've also provided a confidential statement for the purposes of the committee to provide further background. NGS Global is a top-tier executive search and leadership advisory firm. Our partner team have led high-level executive searches to the public, private, education and not-for-profit sectors for over 15 years. These partners have been engaged to undertake multiple appointments for departmental secretaries, commissioners, CEOs and senior executive search services across all jurisdictions in Australia. Over the past 4 years, I've personally managed dozens of successful executive searches, including those for board chairs, board members, CEOs and C-level executives across, again, public, private, education and profit sectors. As indicated, I was the lead executive search consultant appointed by New South Wales Treasury and then Investment New South Wales to work with them on the 6 Senior Trade and Investment Commissioner appointments, 5 of which are completed and in place. I would note that our work is always undertaken with the highest level of sensitivity and confidentiality. First, I'd like to clarify processes. The parameters and processes for recruitment are established by the hiring agency, in this case, New South Wales Treasury and Investment New South Wales using designated New South Wales public service processes. The hiring agency selects and appoints a panel who are the assessors for the appointment. The recruitment agency through their appointed executive search consultant is there to support the hiring agency. As part of the process, we provide written comments from the screening interviews of candidates to the panel members. The panel members then decide whom they wish to take forward to shortlist and interview as part of the selection process. When the selection panel interviews candidates, the search consultant is there as an advisor and as a scribe. It's the panel members who are the assessors. The panel usually comes to a view about those they regard as appointable and then requests the reference checks undertaken. If there's any uncertainty, the panel usually again meets to discuss the recommendations. In relation to selection reports, the usual practice is that following the panel meeting and reference checks, the search consultant prepares a draft selection report and provides this to the chair for review. Following the chair's review and any additions or edits, the usual practice is for this report to be provided to the other panel members by the chair or circulated to all panel members at the chair's request. As indicated in the Department of Premier and Cabinet report, the timing of the first draft selection report for the SCIC Americas Round 2 was the same as for the previous 4 processes and is standard practice. It was the same timing as for the STIC Americas Round 1, for which Ms Brown was also the chair. On 15th of June, I received an email from New South Wales Investment HR Lead with the selection panel report marked final. NGS was asked to arrange panel members to sign this final report as a matter of urgency that afternoon, and we did that. At this time, I did not realise that this was the only version of the selection panel report cited by all panel members. In her testimony to this inquiry on August 5th, panel member Katharina Lowe referred to feeling like she was being used by the hiring agency. By this, Ms Lowe meant Investment New South Wales, not NGS Global, as has been reported, as we performed the role described above, and the DPC report clarifies this too on page 39. I mention this there have been some assumptions in the media that Ms Lowe was referring to NGS Global, and I have certainly confirmed with her that that is not the case. The process for the Agent General. There have been some public comments on an email exchange that NGS had with Investment New South Wales on April 19, 2021 in relation to the Agent General appointment process. The Investment New South Wales officer asked me if she could use an NGS candidate brief as the narrative for documentation that I understood was to be used in departmental briefings. That NGS candidate brief to which she referred was a screening report prepared in February 21 prior to the panel meeting. It was not the selection report following that meeting. Thus, I commented that if she wished to use the narrative from the screening report in any brief she was circulating, it needed to be updated and reflect fully the panel's view and exclude parts that were not relevant. Perhaps inadvisedly, I use the term massaging to describe that process. Finally, I think it's important to clarify that at no stage did the panel chair or other members of Investment New South Wales indicate any dissatisfaction with the work of NGS Global. In fact, on many occasions, quite the reverse, thanking us for our commitment, support, professionalism, candidate care, and our patience and perseverance with various stops and starts in the process of the recruitment for these roles. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Broadbent. I understand we're getting copies of your opening statement.
Yes, I have provided them to the committee.
The members.
Yes.
Okay, thanks very much. We'll proceed to questions now from the opposition. Mr. Mookie.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Dr. Broadbent, for your presence. And I've pronounced your name correctly, have I not? Dr. Broadbent?
Pardon?
It's Dr. Broadbent.
Or Marianne, I'm fine with either.
We might call you Dr. Broadbent if that's okay. Dr. Broadbent, can I just establish some preliminary facts here? I'm just going to refer to the statement that you provided to the committee. NGS Global was retained by the New South Wales Treasury to assist with executive search as it applies to the Senior Trade and Investment Commissioner positions, correct?
Yes.
I'll refer to them as the stick
Yeah,
positions,
that's fine.
if you don't mind. And when were you retained by the New South Wales Treasury?
It was in December 2019.
December 2019. And are
So
you...
officially, I think the contract was signed in late November 2019.
And are you a member of the pre-qualified panel?
Yes, we are. We're a member of the TAS Talent Acquisition Scheme and have been for many, many years.
And so was that contract put to that scheme, and were you asked to bid accordingly?
We were asked to bid, and
To put
we
to
did
that scheme?
through that scheme. Yes,
So it was a tender through that scheme?
it was a tender through that. That's my understanding. Yes.
Okay, and so you, from December 2019 until April 2021, you were assisting the New South Wales Treasury with the appointment of the stick positions for Agent General London, the stick position in Tokyo. Was there a third one?
The other roles that then started were the stick in India, Middle East, and the stick in ASEAN, Singapore.
Okay, and so upon the formation of Investment New South Wales, that process transfers to them, is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
And then your contract transfers as well?
We continued. My understanding is that initially the contract we had already signed was honoured, and then later on, Investment New South Wales asked us for a proposal to undertake the Stick Americas and the Stick China.
Okay, and that was basically a direct arrangement reached between Investment New South Wales and NGS Global?
Yes, and that is what departments are able to do if you are on the talent acquisition scheme.
Yes, there's no suggestion otherwise, Dr. Broadbent. I've just now got to concentrate, please, if you don't mind, on the Agent General.
Mm-hmm.
And just we're looking to establish some basic facts here. I think in your opening statement, you made reference to the work that you did for the New South Wales Treasury at the time. And just to be clear here, you were working at the time directly, I guess, with Deputy Secretary West, Jenny West?
Deputy Secretary West and Secretary Mike Pratt.
Okay, and they were the two people that you were working with?
Yes.
Okay. Can I just establish some base facts here around that Agent General process? When there was a process run in 2020, correct?
Yes.
And that process was interrupted because of COVID, is that correct?
That's correct.
Can we just get the dates of that process, if you don't mind?
That process started in, as I said, December 19.
Yep.
It went through to, I think, early March. And then, because there was no travel allowed, it was decided that it would be timely to halt that process because it would be difficult for someone to actually take up that role. And there was a decision then to put those on hold for that period of time.
Okay. Can I just, from that December 2019 to early March period, there was a call for advertisement. There was advertisements placed, correct?
There were, yes.
They were placed in The Economist, The Financial Times, The Financial Review, and other publications, correct?
They were,
And then they were also placed on the I Work New South Wales site.
yes.
Was it placed anywhere else?
That's my recollection of them being placed. I mean, the advertisements in the local press were handled by the Treasury
Yep.
and the government as is appropriate, and those for the international roles were handled by us.
Okay. And just in that process, that would have led to the development of a long list, correct?
Yes, we call it a client progress report.
Okay. And we'll refer to that as a long list if you don't mind, but I understand
Right.
what you're talking to.
But there's also the search process going on concurrently,
parallel.
which is where we are outreaching.
In that December 2019 to early March process, did you ever reach the stage of a shortlist?
I believe we did.
And was there any interviews held in that period between December 19 and
There
early
were
March?
some interviews held
Yep.
in February and March because there was some pressure initially to have those roles completed prior to a potential, as I understand it, a potential travel for the then Premier.
Okay, so there was a view that the Premier Berejiklian at the time was likely to travel to one of these jurisdictions.
Yes,
Which one?
I think London.
And there was a view that therefore that the role should be in place to allow the Agent General to assist the Premier in her visit.
That's right. Well,
Okay.
that there would be, as part of Global New South Wales, that this was the process that the government wanted in order to have placements made.
Okay, so at the conclusion of that process, in between December and March, do we ever reach the status where a selection panel has met and decided on a preferred candidate?
A selection panel met and then put things on hold. There were some candidates who we then advised that the process was incomplete and that it would be taken up later in the year.
Okay, I might pause there for any colleagues who have any questions before we move forward to the other events that take place in 2020. Okay, let's move forward. COVID occurs.
I'm just looking for my timeline
Take your time, Dr.
itself.
Boyd.
I actually think I haven't brought it with me, but anyway. So I will be relying as best I can.
Thank you, Dr. Broadbent. And if you do need to take any specific details on notice, I'm sure we won't object. But Dr. Broadbent, the process resumed sometime in 2020 when conditions under the pandemic allow. Is that correct?
That's right.
When did that happen?
It was later in the year. I believe it was November, December again of 2020.
Okay, and was there a repeated call for advertisements?
There was.
So the job was re-advertised.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know when it was re-advertised?
I believe it was re-advertised, and I might have to take this on notice, prior to Christmas. I'm not entirely sure that it was re-advertised.
Okay, but the other aspects of what a search firm does, which is to test your own contacts and talent pools occurring concurrently, that's correct?
Yes.
And were the people who applied at the first instance invited to reapply?
Yes, they were.
Did any of them do?
Some did.
And can I ask, at this point in time, when that process was called for applications, when did applications close for the second?
I would have to take that on notice.
Okay. Did Mr. Stephen Cartwright apply in that process?
Initially, I believe he did not.
Okay. So we'll just stay in the 2020 events, if we don't mind,
Right.
and we'll get to 2021 a bit later. But just to be clear, at no point in 2020 did Mr. Stephen Cartwright apply for the job of Agent General in London?
I believe that's the case.
Okay. And so there is a process that takes place in 2020 that leads to the development of a shortlist. That's correct?
Correct.
That shortlist included, 4 people?
I believe so.
And there's going to be one person I'm not going to name, but there was a person who was decided at that point to be who was a preferred candidate who found themselves, who withdrew later from that process, correct?
There was, yes.
Yes. And then there was a second person in that process, or for want of a better term, the runner-up, who becomes the preferred candidate as a result of that person's withdrawal, correct?
That's a construction of it, yes. I mean, sometimes someone withdraws from a process. The second candidate was also regarded as highly appointable.
And this, the second candidate was regarded as highly appointable, correct? That's what you said?
It was very suitable for appointment.
That second candidate who was decided to become highly appointable was Mr. Paul Webster, is that correct?
Yes.
And Mr. Paul Webster ends up being appointed as a Trade and Investment Commissioner, and for which I believe he's still currently serving. That's your understanding too?
He's been appointed the Trade and Investment Commissioner for Europe.
Yeah.
And he reports to Stephen Cartwright because the Agent General covers UK, Israel and Europe.
Okay, so just to be
Be
very
clear, that's almost one, a slightly different appointment, not one of these senior trade.
It's a Trade and Investment
Yes,
Commissioner.
and that's the
so it's the next
distinction.
level.
Yes.
Yes.
and it's been characterised to us as effectively the 2IC.
Yes.
That's fair?
That would be how I would characterise it, yes.
And let's just be clear here. By the end of 2020, Mr. Paul Webster is regarded as the preferred candidate for the Agent General position into London. That's fair?
I think in early 2021.
Okay, early 2021. So we're talking January or February?
Yes.
So in January and February, Mr. Webster is the preferred candidate.
Mm-hmm.
At what point does Mr. Cartwright apply?
My recollection is that he applies in February.
Can you take us through how that took place?
My understanding is that I've received advice that there was to be another candidate considered. I received that advice from the Secretary of New South Wales Treasury at the time, and that candidate was Mr. Stephen Cartwright, and that we were asked to keep things open so that Mr. Cartwright could be considered.
Okay, do you recall, just let me unpack that a little bit. You got a phone call in February from the Secretary of the New South Wales Treasury, is that correct?
No, it was actually at a meeting that we had. I think we were at one of the other panel meetings.
Okay.
And I was advised that there, again, my recollection, that there was another candidate that we were asked to meet as part of the screening process.
Okay, so there's a meeting of another panel. Is that the Japan panel?
I expect it was at the time.
Yes. And so Mike Pratt who's the Secretary of the New South Wales Treasury at the time, correct?
Yes,
He was a member of that panel.
yes.
You and he have a conversation at that meeting, in which we'll be able to establish, I think, when that meeting took place. I'm sure someone upstairs is doing that. But he advised you that there was to be another candidate for the Agent General role,
Yes,
and that candidate was Mr. Stephen Cartwright.
that's right.
And what were you instructed to do?
To treat him as a candidate, which meant that we were asked to meet with him for a screening interview, which we did.
Okay, we'll get to that part of it. But didn't Mr. Pratt indicate to you that he had any conversations with Mr. Cartwright at the time?
I don't recall him saying that he had conversations.
Okay, and so did he give you any explanation as to how he managed to source Mr. Cartwright as a candidate for this
Not
job?
at the time, no.
At any point?
No.
At any point, did you ascertain how precisely Stephen Cartwright was identified by Mike Pratt as the person for the Agent General role?
Well, I understand that Stephen Cartwright was, as it is now been released, that he had a discussion with the then Deputy Premier.
Okay, let me unpack that. So, you understand that he had a conversation with the Deputy Premier at the time, Mr. John Barilaro?
I understand that Stephen Cartwright did.
How do you have this understanding?
Well, at the time, that was a conversation that Mr. Cartwright had indicated to a number of people, including me.
Okay, so you had a conversation with Mr. Cartwright in which Mr. Cartwright tells you
My conversation with Mr. Cartwright related to the screening interview, and that he was keen to provide service to New South Wales as part of his next contribution to the state.
So, Dr. Broadbent, we might need to go a bit slowly over this. So, when you say a screening interview,
Yes.
are you talking about an interview directly between you and NGS Global undertaken by you and a potential candidate?
Yes,
And this is a precursor to a panel interview, correct?
correct.
So-
It's a process where we are asked as the search committee to undertake a screening interview, so that we do that with all candidates who could possibly be shortlisted, and then we provide that and we provide our written comments as part of that process.
Okay, and so you had one of these screening conversations with Stephen Cartwright, as you would with all the
did.
other candidates, correct?
Yes,
Do you recall when you had this conversation with Mr. Cartwright?
I believe it was in February.
And this followed after the request from Mr. Pratt.
Yes,
So how long after would it have been? Was it?
it would have been probably a week after, I expect.
Okay, so we're talking.
We had
middle-
to schedule. We had difficulty scheduling, but we managed to schedule it
Do you think it may have been around February 21 or thereabouts?
somewhere thereabouts.
Okay, thank you. And you have is this a phone conversation, a Teams meeting, or in-person meeting?
It was a Teams meeting because of COVID at the time.
And it was you and your staff, I presume, or was it
Yes,
just
it
you?
was.
And in this conversation, what did Mr. Cartwright tell you about conversations he had with the Deputy Premier?
Just that he was interested to make a contribution to New South Wales, and that he had decided that this role was something which he was very, very interested in.
Yes, and he made a reference to the Deputy Premier.
That's my recollection.
What did he say?
That had been suggested to him that he might consider the role
By the Deputy Premier.
by the Deputy Premier.
So the Deputy, in my understanding,
I'm only sharing this. I would not normally share this. We regard confidentiality of these things very highly. The only reason that I'm sharing this is because it's come into the public domain. Otherwise, I would not be sharing any of that, because we regard that level of confidentiality between candidates and us very highly.
I appreciate that, Dr. Broadbent, but just to be also clear, we do thank you for giving evidence under the Parliamentary Evidence Act, but as a result of that, you have a lawful obligation
Okay.
to answer our questions too, as well. But I appreciate the caution that you've shown.
Thank you.
And I understand the reasons why you have to be cautious as well. But I should just assure you as well, and that you are actually required to answer these questions, so you are not subjected to any criticism yourself, just to be clear. So let's return. Mr. Cartwright, just to be clear here, Is it your recollection that Mr. Cartwright told you words to the effect that the Deputy Premier said that I should think about this job? Or
It would be close to that. I can't remember the exact words.
okay. So do you know when Mr. Cartwright spoke to the Deputy Premier?
No, I do not.
Did Mr. Cartwright make references to any other member of the government?
Not at the time, no.
Not at that time?
Not to me, no.
Okay. Earlier on, you said that you were aware that he had made this point to others about a reference to a conversation with the Deputy Premier. Do you know who else he may have made mention of that to?
No, I do not.
Okay. So I might pause there.
And just on that point, again, in reference to other members of the government, are you aware of others that he made those references to?
No, I do not. No, I'm not.
Did Mr. Cartwright ever indicate that he had spoken to other members of the government in relation to this role?
He didn't indicate that to me in person, no.
Through any other way?
Only in the statement that he did make to me that has come into the public domain.
So he did indicate that he had spoken to both the Deputy Premier and the Treasurer at the time.
That's what he wrote to me, yes.
Treasurer at the time being Dom Perrottet.
That's what he wrote to me, yes.
Can I then maybe take you to that public domain information? I think you might find in front of you, Dr. Broadbent, a printout of an article that was published this morning by the ABC. It might be in one of the documents that's in front of you. We'll get to that shortly, if you don't mind. But there's a screening call that takes place. At this point in time, the selection panel has already met and decided that Mr. Webster was the preferred candidate, correct?
That's correct.
And you had provided advice to the New South Wales Treasury to that effect. That's correct?
Well, it was the Treasury who is
Your client.
deciding that he's the preferred candidate.
Yes. So the Treasury had decided that he was the preferred
The
candidate.
panel had decided he was the preferred candidate.
Okay, and just to be clear, the panel members, do you recall who the panel members were?
Mr. Pratt, Mr. Warwick Smith, and I'm not sure, I can't remember. The other would be another secretary. Might well have been Mr. Reardon.
Was it Mr. Tim Reardon?
I expect it was.
I believe we also have documents in front of us that suggest that it was Mr. Tim Reardon, and that's sort of your recollection as well. And so the Secretary of the Treasury, the Secretary of the Department of Premier and Cabinet, and Mr. Smith have decided that he's the preferred candidate, and that view is then related and endorsed by New South Wales Treasury for at least some period of time?
I believe that there was discussions going on to proceed with that appointment.
Do you ever recall advising New South Wales Treasury that Mr. Webster was a strong candidate?
Yes.
And did you do that in multiple instances?
It was in our initial report. It was what the selection panel decided as well. But it's the selection panel that decides who the candidate is to be appointed.
Okay. And so that process, after you do just so I can work out the sequence of events here, Mr. Pratt asks you to consider Mr. Cartwright sometime in February, probably around the 15th of February, thereabouts.
About that, yeah.
At this point in time, Mr. Pratt, Mr. Reardon and Mr. Smith had already agreed that Paul Webster was the preferred candidate.
There was a draft panel report to that effect.
And did Mr. Pratt indicate to you any reasons why he felt it was necessary to set aside that finding in order to proceed with an additional search?
No.
Okay.
I'm not aware of that.
And then you have a screening conversation with Mr. Cartwright, that's correct?
Correct.
And in which he relates to you that the job, Mr. Barilaro notified him of this job and suggested that he should apply. Is that fair?
That's my understanding. That's my recollection.
Did Mr. Cartwright ever say words to the effect that Mr. Barilaro said that I should be the person for this job?
I don't recall him saying that.
Okay. And so what happens after that, Dr. Broadbent?
What happens after that is there's another panel meeting where the panel interviews Mr. Cartwright and has a discussion around who they would then put forward as the preferred candidate.
Did that take place on the 30th of March?
That would be about right.
Did that interview process on the 30th of March consider any other candidate?
At that stage, I don't believe it did.
So the only reason why that panel was reconvened was to consider Mr. Cartwright's candidacy?
I believe that's the case.
And you were asked to assist in that process?
Yes, I was.
And that process led to the decision to make Stephen Cartwright the preferred candidate at that point in time?
That's correct.
At any point at that point, did anybody indicate to you what was wrong with Mr. Webster?
Perhaps that he didn't have recent knowledge of New South Wales, and that became a factor in a number of the appointments, that familiarity with New South Wales would be helpful. Mr. Webster had been living internationally in the UK and Europe for many years. He held a similar role, in fact, to a stick role for the UK government, and he wanted to do for Australia what he had been doing for the UK government for quite some
And
time.
who put that view to you?
It was my understanding that in the discussion of the panel, that then that was seen as something which might well be important.
Was it the same panel?
Yes, I believe it was.
Okay. But just to be very clear here, this same panel had agreed that Mr. Webster had adequate knowledge of New South Wales to become the first Agent General to London upon the position's resumption in February, but 6 weeks later, after Mr. Cartwright is suggested by the Deputy Premier as a candidate, the panel all of a sudden decides that he doesn't have the same requisite skill and Mr. Cartwright does.
I think these things are always relative, and I think there was consideration that perhaps Mr. Webster would have a steeper learning curve in relation to relationships in New South Wales and understanding of New South Wales business. Again, that's my recollection of how this took place.
But only after the Deputy Premier had suggested to Mr. Cartwright that he come forward.
After Mr. Cartwright became a candidate.
Can I ask you, the Deputy Premier was the Trade Minister at the time, correct?
Correct.
And he was
far
being
recollection.
supported by the New South Wales Treasury. Was that your understanding?
Well, Treasury was actually our client, New South Wales Treasury.
Indeed. And what we understand now is that he was a part of that cluster and that department was supporting him. So it's
His
possible,
capacity as
as
the
the
Trade Minister.
Trade Minister, that was the department that he had support from. Did anyone ever from the Treasury tell you that they were briefing Mr. Barilaro about the Agent General position in London?
No, they did not.
Okay. And so how do you have any idea how Mr. Barilaro would come to have the information that Mr. Webster was a preferred candidate?
I don't know that process. Once he becomes a preferred candidate, the process then of any interaction at the political level is taken by the department, is not taken by us.
Okay. With the Chair's indulgence, I've taken the ABC report, or otherwise I'll leave it back to you. And
Yeah, can we? I'll jump in now with a different round, and when I'm done, I'll throw back to you. Thank you, Dr. Broadbent. I wanted to go to the first round of recruitment for the Sticks America's position just briefly. So, was it your understanding from that first recruitment process that a suitable candidate had been found?
Yes, I believe there were 2 suitable candidates found from the first round.
And were you informed? So 2 suitable candidates were found, and we'll get to the second suitable candidate at some stage soon. But 2 suitable candidates were found. They were put forward to the chair, the head of investment, New South Wales, Amy Brown. Is that correct? Is that who you liaised with?
The process is that we prepared shortlisting recommendations. The panel then discusses these, and then the panel comes to a decision about who they wish to interview. And they interviewed, from my recollection, 4 people, and 2 of those, as was the case for nearly all of the stick appointments, 2 of those were considered appointable or very suitable in this case. Yes, at that time.
Okay, and then so very suitable. Does that mean that you get to the situation where you are checking referees for very suitable candidates?
Yes, we checked referees for both those candidates.
So you did for both. So just to be clear, so that when with public statements that have been made by some that no suitable candidate was found, that was not accurate from what you provided Investment New South Wales.
I think we believe and I think the panel believed there were 2 suitable candidates at that stage. as well. And I think the Department of Premier and Cabinet inquiry has traversed that with good context as well.
And so you were also notified at some point that a candidate had been identified and offered the position?
I was advised that there was seen to be a successful candidate, and that after reference checks, and that there would then be discussions about that candidate. I should indicate that part of the challenge in these roles is that they don't come with the same conditions as Commonwealth roles. That's important to understand, because it means that tends to be a more elongated process, and we've always had to explain this to people, that they're paid in local currency, they don't have accommodation, they have to deal with tax issues, their utilities aren't paid for, and so on. So at that point, my understanding was that Investment New South Wales was going to commence discussions with that preferred candidate.
Yeah, and then just to be clear, in terms of the second suitable candidate that was put forward, they were put into a talent pool, if you like, and that the talent pool is to be drawn upon for future positions, similar positions that become available.
The second candidate was placed at that stage into a talent pool, which meant that if there were similar positions, that either that person could be appointed directly, or that person would be well regarded in any further search, any further recruitment.
Okay, and that second person ended up applying again in the second, put their application in for the second recruitment round.
Correct.
So I just wanted to turn to some of Amy Brown's evidence that was provided to this committee on the 3rd of August. And it's in relation to the selection panel report, what's been referred to as the draft selection panel report that you sent to the chair, but I understand in this situation you sent it to Amy Brown, who was the chair of the selection panel, plus Ms. Kylie Bell. Is that
yes, correct? And the head of HR for Investment New South Wales as well, which is also normally the practice.
Okay, so Amy Brown told this committee that selection report for the second recruitment round, which was sent to her on the 15th of March by NGS Recruitment, by yourself, I understand. Mm-hmm. She said that was sent to her in error. What's your reaction to that?
I think it's fair to say, shocked and surprised by those words that she used. We followed the standard practice that we always had, which was, after reference checks, provide a selection report. We had done the same for Miss Brown after America's 2, and you might note her words in response. She thanked us for that. She didn't say, "This is wrong, I don't want it," or anything like that at all. She thanked us and then made some other comments that she would go seek some informal referees and that the order might change.
Yeah, by her response, you're referring to the email that she sent you in response. Correct. once you sent that through. So just to be clear, for all of the Sticks positions, was that the same process that you undertook, that you sent the draft, what is called a draft selection report, to the chair with your assessment post-referee check?
Yes, usually post-referee check, and that was certainly the case in the second round, Stick Americas. And that was part of our commitment and requirement. And we did that with the same timeline for all the Stick appointments. So
Amy Brown's evidence, I never asked them to send me a report. To me, it came out of nowhere. Again, shocked and surprised at that language?
Yes, I was, because it was part of the standard process. And that was a practice that had been followed all the time previously.
I wanted to. This is in similar. Where Amy Brown gave that evidence as well, just around what happened in that the selection panel discussing both Ms. Cole, who has been her name has been mentioned in this inquiry as one of the potential suitable candidates, as well as Mr. Barilaro. Your understanding of the selection panel discussion on the day of the interview, you've said that you are there almost as a scribe, if you like, recording and making sure, getting everything down in terms of the discussion about both applicants. What was your understanding of where the panel was up to at the end of that interview day? Where were they up to with who was considered best for the job, or who were they considering?
I would think it's fair to say they were both considered strong candidates at the time. The meeting ended because my recollection is that some people had to leave. There was not what you would normally expect as a considered conversation about the next stages. And my report is based on my recollections of the time, and I realise there are other recollections of that. And the point of doing then a first draft is was in effect to test some of that, plus the fact that I understood Ms Brown was having Ms Cole meet a minister, and that had only ever happened previously with the preferred candidate.
So with the...
Kate, can I just do a very quick follow-on just for that? Very
Yeah,
quickly,
sure.
just I mean, you just sort of said that the discussion after that meeting wasn't what normally happened. What was the circumstances
at the end
that?
of normally there is some consideration of rankings, well, not rankings but scorings as well. Doesn't always happen, and it's part of the challenges of being the scribe to work through what you think the panel has decided and what reflects their discussion, which again may change based on their further input and reference checks. So that was the process.
Didn't happen in this case.
Not at that level, no.
So you do say in the statement that you have provided to the committee that your recollection is that with her strong international experience, Ms Cole was seen by the panel to be slightly ahead of Mr Barilaro.
Yes, but I know that
But they were close, is what
they
you
were
said.
close. Other panel members had a different recollection, as it turned out, and I guess I was doing the best to assess what I believed to be the case at the time. I may have got it wrong, but I did my best to assess it, and with the added feature that Ms Cole was going to meet a minister. And so preparing a draft report is exactly one way to do that. And then that is for discussion and that is for review of the chair. It is not a final document. And first drafts are exactly that, they're first drafts. Then you often have a second draft and then a final. It's not that unusual.
For the sticks role though, and the roles I should say, and the recruitment processes that you've undertaken for the others, and preparing the draft selection reports, they were all pretty accurate though, weren't they?
There were no issues with any of the other reports, I think it's fair to say.
No issues with any of the others. Have you had? I mean, in all of your experience, kind of writing these draft selection panel reports after, consideration by the people on the panel of, say, between either a couple of preferred applicants, was this rather unusual how much your interpretation was different to ultimately what Investment New South Wales kind of changed it to?
Well, I wouldn't describe it as Investment New South Wales changing it to, in that sense, but certainly I would say that it was one of the rare occasions when I was later advised that it didn't necessarily reflect the conclusion the panel reached, but it was a very uncertain conclusion in any case, which I think is clear.
And how did that discussion take take place? So you sent the draft selection panel report. What happened then? Was it Ms. Bell or Ms. Brown who contacted you, and did you have a phone conversation about this at any stage?
No, I did not. And I knew after that, I was advised by, I believe, Ms. Brown, that Ms. Cole had met the minister, and as she indicated in her evidence, that she felt it hadn't gone very well, and then that she asked me if I would advise Ms. Cole that she was not appointable, she was not successful, and I did that in the middle of the month.
How much?
So that response then was just in, because I asked you about the draft selection panel report and the conversations that took place between you and Investment New South Wales, whether it was Amy Brown or Ms. Bell, about the need to change the report, and you responded about the interview with Ms. Cole. So just to be clear, are you saying that you didn't have any discussions or hear from either Kylie Bell or Amy Brown until after it was clear Ms. Cole's interview with the minister didn't go well?
That's my recollection, yes, and I've checked my records. And then because there appeared then to be a hiatus and I was seeking confirmation of what was happening, was Mr. Barilaro being appointed, as I did not get any clarification on that, I asked to meet with Amy Brown, which I did face-to-face as soon as you could sort of travel and things, on the 26th of May. And at that meeting, Ms. Brown advised me that Mr. Barilaro was being appointed and asked if I would please change the order of the candidates. And again, there was no comment that I did a bad job in the first place either. Could I please change the order of the candidates to reflect that, and also ensure that I included comments that Mr. Barilaro had a strong reference report. I did that and returned that to her on the 28th of May, and then did not hear back further until I had a call from Kylie Bell on the 8th of June, and Kylie and I had, Ms. Bell and I had a video call, I believe it was, on the 9th of June. She indicated that she felt that the panel report needed some further work.
What date was that, did you say?
That was the 9th of June. I offered to do that. In the end, she decided that she would do that, which was fine by me. That is the prerogative of the panel members, and she did that. And that's my understanding, and that was then resulted in the panel report on the 15th of June.
So the 2 months really between when you sent the draft selection panel report, and then you said we were trying to find out after you found out about Ms. Cole's interview, you were trying to
I was trying to seek clarification.
More information.
I was just trying to seek
about Mr.
clarification
Barilaro's
of where things were at in the process, and
how, and you just couldn't. Did you receive no response to those?
I don't believe I received a response to that, and it was, things are under discussion. That would have been the most I would have heard, and I was not asked again until the 8th of June to have a discussion about the selection report.
In the discussion about the selection report, so you were essentially told at that point to make sure the selection panel report therefore confirmed that Mr. Barilaro was the successful candidate. That's what you needed to do with that.
That was the request that Ms. Brown gave me on the 26th of May, which resulted in the second draft report on the 28th, and then further work was done on that selection report by, I believe, Ms. Bell in June.
And was that the only time that INSW held the pen for one of these selection reports, or did they do that in relation to other appointments as well?
I don't recall if they did it previously. There are often minor changes made along the
Yeah.
way. That's standard practice.
Were you concerned about what seemed to be the changing in the ranking, though? You had to essentially upgrade Mr. Barilaro in terms of some of the qualities, some of the capability framework, meeting and exceeding, for example. You technically, I think, 2 of his meets became 2 exceeds. That, I mean, on what basis does a professional recruitment agency like yours just make such a substantial change to an assessment?
I would go back to the first report when I had given Miss Cole more exceeds than Mr. Barilaro. The second report had them at the same level. And the third report, which again is the panel's report, it's not our report, had one assessment for Mr. Barilaro higher, because that again was the panel chair's view. As I said, I've since found out that panel report was not sent to the other panel members until the 15th of June with a rush to please sign it.
Yes. Okay, move to questions from Mr. Graham now.
So just to clarify that, I didn't want to cut across, but just to clarify the point you've made, that final report where you've described Mr. Barilaro coming up, reflecting the chair's view, was that the only time that the agency was responsible for drafting an entire panel report compared to those other appointments?
Well, the report belongs to the panel, and we provide that service.
Yes.
So that's what we do. And on this occasion, the client wanted further work on it, and in the end, one of the panel members, Miss Bell, decided that she would do that with my fine. I said to her that was absolutely fine.
Yeah,
She
no, I
wished to
accept
work on
that's
that.
within
Yeah.
you've made that point well. It's within the range of acceptable behaviours here. Ultimately, it's their report.
It's their report,
I'm
not
simply
mine.
asking, did that occur, that the pen was taken up by a panel member in
Not
that way?
not
with any other
significantly,
report?
no.
No, thank you.
Dr. Broadbent, we might just return to the Agent General. Sorry to jump around between the two, but I think we'll certainly may as well go. Dr. Broadbent, I think we had us at the point where the selection panel, which I think consisted of Mr. Pratt, Mr. Reardon, Mr. Smith, and was Miss Brown a member of that panel as well?
Which one? The Agent General? No, I don't believe so,
And
because
Miss-
at that
Miss
stage,
West, though? Miss
Pardon?
West was, though.
Miss West
Miss
may
Jenny
have
West?
been.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
And they interview Stephen Cartwright on the 30th of March, that's correct?
I believe so.
And they interview no other candidate, that's correct?
I believe so.
And were you at that?
I was.
Yeah. And so when you say you believe so, there was only one candidate, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Because it was a short meeting, relatively short meeting.
And therefore, on that day, do they decide that Stephen Cartwright is the preferred candidate?
I believe they did.
Did they then instruct you to contact Mr. Cartwright and inform him that he was the preferred candidate?
That doesn't happen immediately, because it's always subject to reference checks and further discussions. And so I contacted Mr. Cartwright to let him know that the interview had gone well, and that he was going to the next stage, which is the language that we use, and that then I would do reference checks with him and explained he would get a template from us to indicate the referees.
You just said that it was a very short selection interview. Can you just take us through, was it shorter than the others? What was it?
No, I meant it was, I know it was a late afternoon, so there was only one candidate. That's what I meant by short. It was
How
not
long was the interview?
all of these interviews took about 30 to 35 minutes.
Okay, so yeah, okay.
Same length as the other interviews.
Okay. And you contacted him to let him know that he was going to go to the next stage.
Mm-hmm.
Did you do that on the same day?
I believe I would have, yes.
So that
Usually I
evening?
do.
You would have called him that evening.
That's usually my practice, to do that as soon as I can.
Okay. And then did he contact you after that?
I believe there would have been an exchange of referees around that, and then I would have contacted his referees and done those reference checks.
But just to be clear, Dr. Broadbent, did he specifically email you the day after?
I don't recall that.
Do you recall getting an email from him in which he was discussing with you his expectations around remuneration in March last year?
There were many discussions about expectations for remuneration.
I'm asking you specifically, Dr. Broadbent, do you recall getting an email from Mr. Cartwright around March 2021 pertaining to Mr. Cartwright's expectations around remuneration?
I believe I would have, because I received a number of them.
Okay. How many, by the way, did you receive?
I don't know. We had discussions about it, and then he documented his expectations, and he had the situation with the Agent General and under New South Wales Treasury and the other roles under Treasury were that there was a base salary, but then our advice was that we could say to candidates that there would be some consideration given to the individual circumstances of candidates. That changed once it was clarified that these roles came under the GSE Act, and so there was a ceiling on them.
Well, I think let's not go too far down that rabbit hole of legality, because there's a lot of confusing advice about the GSE Act. But did you want to ask anything there?
Well, if perhaps could you take on notice how many times you were emailed about
I will take that on
remuneration?
notice.
Thank you.
But just to be clear here, according to the statement that you provided us, there's a period of time in which you are undertaking these conversations with Mr. Cartwright, and there's a period where which you say that Investment New South Wales then entered into direct negotiations with Mr. Cartwright.
That's correct.
Do you know at what point Investment New South Wales enters into direct negotiations with Mr. Cartwright?
I can't tell you the exact date, but I could probably find out.
Do you know by month? It seems
It
like
would
it
have
was,
been. It would have been perhaps a week or two after that.
So April?
April, I believe. Yes.
Okay. So there's a couple of weeks, basically a fortnight or thereabouts in April, in which you're discussing Mr. Cartwright's remuneration expectations directly with him.
I'm going backwards and forwards with Treasury
Sure.
because I'm tasked with what they are willing to have that discussion about.
Okay. You mean Treasury? You mean Investment New South Wales? Was this
Oh,
point
yes,
therefore?
sorry. It changed. It literally
In the
The
middle.
next
in
day.
that April.
In fact,
time.
you've interviewed Mr. Cartwright on the 30th of March, and Investment New South Wales formally, I think, begins on the 29th of March or the 31st of March.
Yeah.
But advice from Treasury continues, doesn't it, post that date? Is that correct?
I think the whole process didn't initially transfer. I think Ms. West continued
Yep.
discussions
Until
And-
she transferred.
until she transferred and brought Miss Brown into the loop to indicate that this was an ongoing discussion
And
that
can
she
I ask
needed
one
to be aware
specific
of.
question here, which is you say on April 12 I was provided with advice regarding the financial arrangements that would be put in place for the Agent General role, subject to final confirmation from Investment New South Wales. Who conveyed those? Who conveyed that advice to you?
Miss West.
As at that stage from Treasury.
At that stage from Treasury, I believe, yes.
Can I just go back to the March interaction about remuneration and specifically a March email? Just again, Dr. Broadbent, do you mind just searching your memory? Do you think it's possible that you did get an email from Mr. Cartwright around the 31st of March?
It's possible I did.
Okay. Can I take you to the story that was published this morning?
You can.
Okay. It says this. In March 2021, I'm just reading from the first page from the fifth paragraph. In a March 2021 email to the government appointment recruitment agent, Mr. Cartwright claims then Treasurer Dominic Perrottet agreed that key expenses over and above the lucrative salary would be taken care of after the issue was raised with him by the Deputy Premier and Trade Minister, Mr. Barilaro. Do you see that paragraph in the story?
I believe I did.
It's in front of you. It's in one of the
that one.
documents. You may wish to read along.
Right.
You can see it's the fifth paragraph down.
Mm-hmm.
Did you recall receiving an email from Mr. Cartwright in which he said the then Treasurer Dominic Perrottet agreed that key expenses over and above the lucrative salary would be taken care of?
I did receive that, and I'm confirming that because Investment New South Wales asked me to provide them with any evidence early on that was the basis for Mr. Cartwright's request. And after some difficult discussions and negotiations, and some by phone, then I provided that email to Ms. West in strict confidence.
Okay, sorry. I'm going to now pause the rest of the questioning about this article and just talk to you about that. So, sorry, Investment New South Wales, Miss West at this point is at Investment New South Wales?
Pardon?
Miss West is at Investment New South Wales at this point?
She would have just transferred across,
Yep.
I believe.
And so she, at the point where presumably she takes over direct negotiations with Mr. Cartwright, she makes an inquiry with you as to the nature of the conversations you had?
Well, I had made representations to Miss West on the basis of Mr. Cartwright's request. So
What was Mr. Cartwright's request?
Mr. Cartwright's request was for a significantly higher salary, which he had clarified a salary more in line with what he had received previously.
Okay, and so you get an email in March 2021 in which he puts this in writing, correct?
Correct.
You then have conversations with Mr. Cartwright, correct?
I had ongoing conversations with Mr. Cartwright, and I also indicated to him that I was making representations and discussions on his behalf. I had early on in the process clarified with him what might and might not be possible in the role. I do wish to clarify that because in other evidence, Ms. Brown indicated that I must have told him that there was a higher salary. That was not my conveying to Mr. Cartwright was initially the same as all other candidates, that it was a set salary of $450,000, although early on that some consideration would be given to particular circumstances. Then through that process, there was a discussion within what was Treasury and became Investment New South Wales about the possible remuneration for the Agent General role, seeing as though it was seen as something which was seen differently to the other roles, and differently in the sense that perhaps it was more high profile than the other roles. That was, again, that's my understanding from the outside.
Okay, that makes that's helpful context, Dr. Broadbent. But just specifically, when you are making representations on Mr. Cartwright's behalf to the Treasury, as you were discussing it with Mr. Cartwright, in any of those conversations, did he make reference to an agreement he had with the Deputy Premier?
I should say that perhaps making representations is not the right phrase because my client is Treasury or Investment
When you
New
were
South
relaying
Wales.
his position to
I
them?
relayed his position. At the time, I wasn't sure exactly where the details came from, but he did convey that that was his understanding, that he understood it would be possible for his salary to be matched.
Okay, just thank you. We will now refer to it as you were understanding his position to relay to your client.
Yes.
Did he, in explaining his position to you, make reference to an agreement he had with Mr. Barilaro?
I don't know about any agreement. I don't know that he used those words.
What words did he use?
Other than he'd had a discussion, as my understanding, he'd had a discussion around that. And again, that was what he put in writing, that his understanding was that a higher salary would be available to him.
Did he put in writing to you that the Deputy Premier and the Treasurer had reached an agreement that the cost of suitable family accommodation would be taken care of by the New South Wales Government?
I believe there were words to that effect. I do not know the veracity of that, though.
Okay.
And taken care of by the New South Wales Government outside of the salary package.
Yes, because it's usually looked at as a total remuneration.
Yeah. And when you say he was talking about matching his salary, if you can just confirm that's his salary at the time, that was a package of over $800,000. That's what he'd been on for some years.
He was not receiving that salary at the time. He had left Business New South Wales.
Okay, so just to be clear here, I'm going to put you the full quote that's been published and just see if this accords with your recollection. Did Mr. Cartwright in an email to you say, apart from improving base salary package he mentioned low fives, he indicated privately, of course, that he and the Treasurer had reached an agreement that the cost of the suitable family accommodation, including cleaning, etc., in an inner suburb of London, could be taken care of by the New South Wales government outside of the salary package?
I believe he did put those words in writing to me,
Okay,
and it's on record.
right. And so, just to be clear here as well, did you understand from that Mr. Cartwright certainly felt like he had previously had a conversation with the Deputy Premier in which the specific details of his remuneration were discussed?
I wouldn't want to speculate what he had.
I'm not asking you to speculate, Dr. Broadbent. I'm asking you, did you conclude from that communication that Mr. Cartwright was of the belief that he had a discussion with the Deputy Premier about his remuneration package?
I thought that perhaps that had taken place, but again, I had no
Yep.
evidence of the veracity of that.
And you, of course, kept this communication from Mr. Cartwright confidential.
I did.
And then at some point, Miss West starts to make inquiries with you about what Mr. Cartwright's salary expectations were.
And for evidence of that, yes.
And in seeking evidence of that, you say that led to some interchange with the Treasury in which you had to consider whether you had an obligation to keep it confidential?
Yes, and I was asked to please provide it because it was a communication about remuneration and what was the basis for that.
And so your client effectively asks you to pass on the email,
Yes,
and you pass on the email?
I did in confidence.
Okay.
I hesitate to say again.
Understood.
And that's because you obviously undertake to keep the privacy of people's...
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay, so do you recall when you provided this to the Investment New South Wales?
I do have it here. You
Yep.
probably have it as well.
Well, do you wish to table it?
No.
Well, can we ask you to table it? Or...
If I'm required to table it,
Well, I'm going to ask you to table it.
right.
Thank you, Dr. Broadbent. If you could pass that up, and we will get
Actually, I don't
formally
have the copy.
tabled.
I don't have a physical copy with me,
put it somewhere.
but I can provide it.
Okay.
Well, if it can take it on notice, perhaps.
Well, yes. I
it on notice.
ask you to take it on, to provide it on notice if you don't mind.
Sure.
Or perhaps earlier than that if possible as well. Okay. Can I just go on? In respect to this particular email that you received in March, did Mr. Cartwright say to you that he was fielding other offers and wanted the process concluded quickly?
I believe that was in that email, yes.
Did he also say, I don't want to directly disclose my discussions, etc., or be accused of being unrealistic or playing hardball in negotiations, but my participation in the process to date has been shaped by these expectations and I can't hold off other offers for too much longer, so I need a degree of certainty on this role ASAP?
I believe that was in the email, yes.
Okay. And was there any other material information in the email you think we should be aware of?
Not that I can recall.
Okay. I might just pause for 30 seconds and allow my client to ask me. Well, sorry, not my client. My colleagues to
I'm
ask.
happy
Helpers.
to ask a question in
helpers are
either
happy.
capacity. I just want to return to that that statement we were talking about where Ms. West on April 12 provided advice regarding the financial arrangements that would be put in place for the Agent General role subject to final confirmation. What were those, at that stage on April 12, advised by Treasury, what were those financial arrangements?
There were, I do have that. I can read through that if you
Yep,
would like.
thank you.
I will have to find it. Where are my glasses?
How long have we got? 50 seconds.
Then we'll get a bit extra. Well, perhaps do you want to table those if they're lengthy?
No, they're not
Okay.
too lengthy.
Might
Read
take a
them.
while anyway.
And again, this is subject to final confirmation at this stage. This was in an email sent to me by Miss
Yeah.
West. Salary and super package of 600K, significant contribution to accommodation, understanding that a well-located 3-bedroom residence is required, appropriate temporary accommodation till longer-term arrangements are located, significant contribution to school fees for dependent children, reasonable location expenses, reasonable travel between the UK and Sydney as required. And that was following discussions with Investment New South Wales and New South Wales Treasury.
Right, so that's a position on April 12.
12th of April, yes.
Thank you.
I've just got about probably 5 minutes of questions, and then you can have the rest of the time. Dr. Broadbent, I will go back to the Americas role, and specifically when John Barilaro pulled out of the recruitment process at a particular time. I understand maybe it was around the 23rd of February.
Mm-hmm.
So the interviews hadn't taken place, but he'd put his application in, and I think contacted you at that time via email to say he had withdrawn from the process. What did you do at that time? Can you remember who you notified and what you did?
I would have advised Investment New South Wales that he had withdrawn, and then my recollection is a short while later he decided to come back into the candidate pool.
Yes, so you would have advised Ms. Brown that Mr. Barilaro had told you that he was withdrawing.
I believe I would have done that.
And did he provide in the email to you the reason why he was withdrawing?
I don't recall the reason he was withdrawing, no. I don't believe he said that.
He didn't state the reason why.
No.
Then when he came back 2 days later, did he say why he was throwing his hat in the ring again after withdrawing 2 days earlier?
I don't recollect that, the detail of that at the time.
So what was your reaction to Mr. Barilaro 2 days after withdrawing from such a senior role recruitment process, coming back two days later and saying, oh, hang on, no, I want to be considered? Were you concerned?
I just accepted that. I didn't read anything into it one way or the other.
So
It happens from time to time.
It does. I mean, even in situations where, I mean, clearly a trade commissioner needing, diplomacy skills and a steady disposition, you would think you didn't think that somebody being so shaky, withdrawing, applying again was in any way concerning.
I would not want to put that construction on it because I don't know what the situation was.
And so when he then said that 2 days later it was back, you said you sent off an email, I assume once again to Ms. Brown, telling her that Mr. Barilaro was once again back in the race.
I believe that's what I would have done. I don't recall exactly the details at the time.
And it was roughly like a 48-hour period between.
It was a short
those two.
period, yes.
Okay, I think that's it for me. If you want to go.
Can I just ask, sorry, just to jump in there for 1 second, is that something you often see in processes where a candidate will withdraw and come back in?
It's not every day, but it certainly does happen. And it's often because I had it earlier this year in another recruitment, nothing to do with public service, where a candidate rethought and decided that that person would apply for a role. And sometimes when people decide that, I'm going to withdraw, then they realise, okay, well, that's not something I'm now going to do. And then they come to realise perhaps it is something that they're passionate about.
We'll go to the opposition now for the remainder of the
Just
time.
to round out that April 12 advice, sorry to jump around on you again, but we're returning to that April 12 advice from Treasury. Are you aware whether that advice, when it was provided to you, had been either advised or had that position been consulted with the Deputy Premier's office?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Or the Deputy Premier?
I do not know
Yeah.
that. No.
And are you aware, given it was Treasury advice, are you aware if it had been advised or had that position been consulted with the Treasurer's Office or the Treasurer?
I do not know.
Thank you.
No.
Uh,
I mean, the information that I got says after discussions with Investment New South Wales and New South Wales Treasury officials.
Yes, thank you.
Dr. Broadbent, you make clear that Investment New South Wales takes over the direct negotiations, and I think we've established that takes place towards late April. That's correct.
Mhm.
And what further role does NGS Global have in the agent general process after that?
The only involvement then was continuing to talk with the second place candidate, because there was a strong view that the panel was keen to perhaps appoint him in a role as a trade and investment commissioner. So that was my role, was to continue to engage with that candidate, which I did.
Okay. And can I then concentrate then on the period of time in which you are responsible for negotiating or not negotiating necessarily, but coming to understand Mr. Cartwright's expectations in order to relate to your client about remuneration. We established that there is an email on the 31st of March, which I appreciate you undertaking to provide it to us on notice. And afterwards, you said that there are numerous emails, and you'll say you'll take on notice how many. How frequently were they arriving? Was it every day, every 2 days,
Every few days, I think, at the time. There was that, and there were discussions,
Yep.
because I think the candidate wanted it resolved.
ASAP, according to the email that we had reported. So, what, you were speaking to him on a daily basis?
It would have been, as I said, I think every couple of days,
Okay, and were they usually calls you initiated or he initiated?
either.
Okay, and he, of course, at this point is based in New South Wales, correct?
Yes.
And he at this point has ceased service for Business New South Wales. Is that your
Yes, he has.
understanding?
Yes.
And again, I just want to stress Business New South Wales here is an organisation that is not at all involved in this process.
No, not at all involved.
And look, again, as I've said before, like they're a highly reputable organisation. There's not a ball involved, and there's no implications on their behalf. Just to be clear here. But can I also just say, when you had these conversations with him, was he making reference to conversations he had with the Deputy Premier?
Not specifically at that stage, but just that was his expectation, which he had made clear initially in terms of his interest in the position did relate to it needed to be provide appropriate financial and other support.
Okay. And did he make reference to an understanding that he felt the Deputy Premier had with the Treasurer?
No, I don't recall that at all,
Okay, other than in that email.
other than that email.
Okay, fair enough. And so was there the nature of the negotiations you were having, was it about the base salary and the additional aspects of his package?
It was about the total package, basically.
And was it his expectation that his base salary should be around $800,000 a year?
His expectation was that it should be more than what was officially on offer.
So Miss Brown told us that he had an expectation of around $800,000 a year. Is that your understanding, or at least comparable to his existing arrangement?
The phrasing of it, I believe, was comparable to the previous arrangement that he had had.
Okay, and just to be clear as well, did he make specific reference to that $800,000 request?
Yes, he did.
So he was asking at some point in these discussions for a salary around $800,000 a year.
He was indicating that was what he had been on, and that one often has these conversations with candidates, including particularly when bringing candidates from the public sector into private sector into the public sector, and our job is to set their expectations.
Look, and to be fair to Mr. Cartwright, there's nothing wrong with asking, is there? Like,
there's only one time you can usually ask, and that's at the beginning.
Indeed. And well, by the end of your interactions with Mr. Cartwright, had his expectations substantially moved down?
I think part of the reason that I suggested to Investment New South Wales that they needed to deal directly with him is that he did see me as the intermediary and not the decision maker, which is correct. And so I felt things could possibly move along more quickly if Investment New South Wales dealt with him directly because he was aware that I was not the person making the final decisions about his package, and I was conveying things to him.
Did you believe that he thought that the people making the final decision in relation to his remuneration was not even Investment New South Wales, but indeed the Deputy Premier or the Treasurer?
I don't know that, no.
Did he ever indicate to you that he was speaking directly to either of those people?
Not after that email, no, I don't.
Can I just ask,
Nothing.
did just occurred to me, but Dr. Broadbent, but the selection panel that met on the 30th of March, did anybody put in a conflict of interest declaration?
I don't recall.
Did anybody make any disclosures whatsoever?
I believe people did indicate that they knew Mr. Cartwright professionally through his role.
Did anybody declare to you that they've had previous discussions with Mr. Cartwright specifically about the Agent General position?
I don't recall that, no.
Did anybody declare to you that they had any discussion with Mr. Cartwright about his future employment in the New South Wales government?
I don't recall that. I don't recall I don't recall that it was raised.
But you would have recorded it yourself. You were the people keeping the paperwork, were you not?
Yes.
And there is no paperwork that you have access to which records a declaration made by Mr. Pratt, Mr. Smith, or Mr. Reardon, or Ms. West?
There is usually the declaration is separate, and that's handled often by the department. And there may have been the most there would have been, I believe, which is quite normal, is that some of the panel would have known Mr. Cartwright.
Sure. But I'm asking very specifically, other than a professional association with which, to be fair, lots of people would have had with Mr. Cartwright as the CEO of Business New South Wales, did specifically any panel member make a declaration to the effect that they had met informally with Mr. Cartwright to discuss his interest in the
I don't recall that.
Okay, thank you. And so just going back again in time to the March to April, I did appreciate very much, Dr. Broadbent, the context you gave, but I'm not sure you actually answered my question, which was by the time that you actually transferred responsibility directly to Investment New South Wales, had Mr. Cartwright's expectations of a salary of circa $800,000 shifted downward?
I don't know. I don't believe. There was further discussion then ongoing discussion around the actual status of the roles concurrent with this. And that was another factor.
And so that's around the salary expectations. Clearly, the other aspects of his remuneration package were subject to some discussion as well, correct?
Yes, they were.
And they were cost of living allowance, was it?
Well, eventually what was decided, because the role did come under the GSE Act, was that the approach that Investment New South Wales took and has taken for the other roles is that there will be the payment of a difference in cost of living between living in Sydney and living in that city.
Sure. And was it the case that Mr. Cartwright was also seeking, and how many discussions did you have about the suitable family accommodation?
I don't recall, but probably 2 or 3.
Okay. And what about the school fees?
That was also requested, yes.
In addition to the cost of living allowance and in addition to...
Yes, and I think, to be fair and understand, these are all things that are normal part of other Commonwealth agency and many state agency and comparable roles.
No doubt. And again, no one can begrudge Mr. Cartwright from seeking this. Was Mr. Webster, when he was the preferred candidate, making similar requests?
No, he was not.
In respect to any of the other stick commissioners that have been interviewed or appointed for any of the Japan role or the ASEAN role, was any such request being made?
There has been a cost of living arrangement for the roles. As far as I'm aware, that cost of living arrangement includes some of those factors, but there was certainly a ceiling on that.
Okay, but just to be very clear here, Mr. Webster, did you ever enter into direct sort of, I guess the term you used, did you ever progress him to the next stage in which these conversations would have commenced?
Those conversations had started. Mr. Webster was already living in the UK and was comfortable with the arrangements.
So just to be clear here, Mr. Webster is established as a preferred candidate late 2020, early 2021, that's fair?
Yes,
And you have progressed to the next stage with him, that's fair?
that's fair.
In which you start to discuss his remuneration expectations
Yes,
and his additional allowances conditions.
yes.
How far down that process did you get?
Really, it was just the articulation of the base salary with super. That was the sum total of discussions, and then that was put on hold. And Mr. Webster understood that there was some uncertainty going forward.
So when Mr. Pratt then speaks to you circa, I've been advised it may have been around the 10th of February,
Yeah.
At the Japan panel meeting, in which he indicates to you that Mr. Cartwright's a candidate or should be considered.
Mm-hmm.
And then do you call Mr. Webster up and say, hey, there's a new candidate here?
I have had ongoing conversations with Mr. Webster to say that there is another candidate that's come into the process, and I've asked him to be patient while we go through that. He was aware of that.
So at the time he's told this, though, he's having conversations with you about remuneration because he thinks he's the preferred candidate. Yet that all comes to a halt because Mr. Cartwright's now been recommended into the process, correct?
Correct. And I continued to have conversations with Mr. Webster, who was, I believe, very understanding of the situation.
Well, he sounds like a saint, Dr. Broadbent, in the way in which he's reacting to these turns of events.
He was, that could be a word, yes.
Well, he's saintly in his forbearance.
He was very understanding of the situation, and he understood, and he understood that perhaps he didn't have some of the immediate connections in New South Wales. He was keen to continue in the process, and eventually I came back to him and said, look, I think the situation is that there may be an additional role, and that will in fact report to the Agent General.
But
And
Dr.
he was
Broadbent,
interested in that.
the summary seems to be this, that Mr. Webster is selected for the job. His expectations around salary are far more in keeping with what people would expect from the public sector. And to be clear here, he would still be highly remunerated by public sector standards as well. Mr. Cartwright enters the process late. Mr. Webster is told to stand aside. Mr. Cartwright demands substantially more. He invokes the name of the Deputy Premier in some agreement with the Treasurer. And then we enter into a period of protracted and heightened salary negotiations that last for some months. Because as we've learnt through this inquiry, his package isn't resolved until July. Is that a fair summation of what's taken place here?
I think it's a summation. I'm not sure I would characterise it all that way. And I think it's a matter of how far down the process Mr. Webster was as well. Certainly, he was advised he was the preferred candidate.
When was the additional role that Mr. Webster filled created?
After, I believe, the process for the Agent General appointment was coming to a conclusion, Investment New South Wales then identified that they would be keen to have Mr. Webster taking, and the division was that he would focus on Europe, and the Agent General would focus on the UK, and so that then proceeded with a new role that Investment New South Wales created for him, because they were going to have, my understanding is they were going to have some of those roles in any case, and they perhaps advanced this role because they had a candidate that they were keen on. I should also make a comment in relation to Mr. Webster. Mr. Webster was not in the public sector at that time, though he was consulting to the UK government amongst many other governments.
But it sounds like the creation of that role was just one more thing that smoothed the way for Stephen Cartwright to then be appointed to this other role. Do you have a perspective on that?
I don't know that it smoothed the way. It meant that the Investment New South Wales and the State of New South Wales got two good candidates. I think that was the view of the panel, who had complementary experience and skills.
Okay, that is the end of our time for questions from the opposition and crossbench. Does the government have any questions?
Yes, we do. And just want to pick up on that point in terms of the Trade and Investment Commissioner role that was created on the back of the Agent General, but that's a role which has been replicated in other senior Trade and Investment Commission roles as well, hasn't it? That
I
there's a
believe it
Trade and
has been,
Investment
yes. Yes.
That's attached to it as well. So it's not unique to the London, Europe role, is it?
I believe that was certainly the planning that Investment New South Wales had,
Yeah, thank you very
and
much.
particularly for such a big region.
Yes, indeed. Just wanting to pick up back to the draft selection report. Now, you've told the committee and in the confidential advice you provided us as well, that is a standard process, is that
Yes.
right, that you usually would provide? And so the evidence that Ms Brown gave this committee that it came out of the blue, effectively, or was a surprise, was that provided in other processes as well that were running concurrently to the American one, or that had happened
Absolutely
before?
provided exactly in the same time frame.
Yeah.
As soon as reference checks were done, the selection report was drafted and provided to the chair.
And did you receive any response from Ms Brown or anyone else in terms of the receipt of that draft selection report?
Yes, and that's been in other proceedings. She thanked me for it and then indicated that there might be some change in order and she was seeking informal referees.
Okay. And with respect to the draft selection report, are there normally changes that occur between the draft and the final selection report?
It's not unusual.
Yeah. And how does that usually occur? Does that usually occur through direct feedback after the draft's received, or does that occur through panel meetings or the like? Or
It's usually a combination of that, and usually if there is any uncertainty, particularly at the end of a process, end of a panel meeting, then there is usually a further panel meeting or further discussion of the selection report by all panel members.
Now, we've received evidence before, and I think you've touched upon it today as well, in terms of some of the criticisms that initial draft report was, I think the term used was wildly inaccurate to what actually occurred in that draft panel. Just wondering if that was conveyed to you at any point in time.
No, never. The first I heard of it was in Miss Brown's evidence.
Okay, so there was nothing that was relayed to you at any point in time that was inaccurate and there needed to be any change made to that?
The only conversation, the only feedback I ever recall from that is in fact the response that she gave, and then the further discussion on May the 26th, which was a very civilised, professional meeting. She asked me, let's do coffee, which I did. And she asked
When you could come back to New South Wales?
Pardon?
When you could come back to New South
You
Wales?
want to come back to New South Wales? Yes, I'm New South Wales born and bred.
Oh,
I
well,
should
that's good
say.
to hear.
Yes, yes, I know New South Wales very well. I have family here, and that conversation was also very civilised, and it was, I had a very good relationship with Miss Brown at that stage, and I had no reason to think there was any overly negative criticism about that report. I understand that it might not have reflected what three of the panel members thought, but that was my best recollection at the time.
Yes. And just to that point, in terms of the panel members and their thoughts, in providing that draft report, would your expectation usually be that the other panel members would be provided with that draft report as well for their comments, or just the lead panel member?
No, I put in the email to Ms Brown that I hadn't sent it to Ms Lowe or Mr Smith because I wanted her to see it first,
Yes.
and to make any suggestions or recommendations, because again that's usual in the process, and often a board chair wants to manage that process with their key stakeholders, who are the other members of the panel, and they will often then forward it themselves. As I said, I didn't know that she didn't do that with any other than the 15th of June.
Yes. And just following in terms of those reports, so the first draft report you provided, the second report there was a revision that you outlined, I think, to the committee, where it was reflected that Mr Barilaro and Ms Cole were on the same level. And then when it came to the third and final report by the agency, the third and final report that you had no interaction in changing anything on that report, that was all done by the agency, is that correct?
It was done by the agency after the second draft report.
Yep. Okay, after the second draft report. Thank you. Now, returning to the first round of the America Stick position, did you provide copies of candidate reports? I think you outlined before that your contacts then were the Treasury Secretary, Mr. Pratt, and Jenny West. Is that the Deputy Secretary, Jenny West? Is that correct?
In the first round
Yes, the first round of the Stick Americas. Yes.
that was in Investment New South Wales then.
Oh, it was Investment New South
Yes.
Wales was at that time. Okay.
Yeah.
But was still dealing with Ms. West, was it at that point?
I was
or-
dealing with Miss West initially
Yep.
in that selection process, and then she called me to say that she was thinking of applying herself. I advised her she needed to make that decision very quickly, and she needed to let people know, and that she needed to immediately recuse herself as well.
Okay. So in terms of the candidate reports that occurred, so do you have a date recollection as to when that conversation occurred with Ms. West?
Yes, I believe it was probably the 1st of May.
Okay.
I would further say that Miss West had not seen any candidate reports at that stage.
Okay.
All she had seen was what we call the first client progress report, which simply states who are the engaged candidates, who are the candidates we are approaching, and who are the candidates who've applied, and we've decided our recommendation is that they not proceed.
So I take it after the 1st of May, there were no further reports that you provided, Ms. West. Is
That's
that
right.
correct? Yep.
Yes.
And on the basis of those first draft reports that you'd provided her, do you think that that could have given her any unfair advantage in that process at all, or?
I wouldn't like to comment on that. She was aware of some of the candidates. She was also actively sourcing, though. She was highly engaged as a source herself. So she would have known who some of those candidates were.
Thank you very much. And I might hand over to my colleague, Mr. Barrett, but I'll come back in for another one.
Thank you, Dr. Broadbent. I'm just going to go back to that selection panel as well. You mentioned it wasn't unusual to have sort of differing views leaving one of those selection panels between the draft and the final report. You also mentioned that it was people had to leave that meeting, I think, early sort of thing.
My recollection is that, and this relates to the conversation I had with Miss Brown about Mr. Fitzpatrick as well, that some people, I believe, had to leave the meeting, and that meeting, there was a decision that there were two preferred candidates, but there was no discussion about how they would provide comments about the focus capabilities at that stage.
So normally at the end of one of those meetings, I'd imagine you with the pen would take a bit of a temperature check of what everyone thought, which would mean you're more likely to get that final report aligned with what everyone else.
Yes, usually the chair does that.
Mm-hmm. And in this case, that didn't really happen.
It happened to the extent that both Ms. Cole and Mr. Barilaro were seen as strong candidates, and that they would both go to reference checks.
Dr. Broadbent, you drew our attention early on to, I guess, people picking up where you've used the term massaging.
Yes.
And it sort of blew out of proportion to a way.
Completely.
Has there been other instances throughout this inquiry where things that have been reported were exaggerated, or there was a bit of a gulf between what was reported and what actually happened?
Possibly, but it was more in my view, in some of Ms. Brown's evidence.
And in that evidence in itself, has there been, I guess, as a partner of NGS Global, are you concerned about reputation damage to your organisation?
Well, I think one of the issues that I had with some of that evidence related to how Mr. Fitzpatrick was treated. And as is clear in the DPC report, I several times sought to provide further advice about that. The first was that Mr. Fitzpatrick should have been interviewed by the second selection committee because it was a different committee and a different process. Ms. Brown decided not to do that. And secondly, then at the time of preparing the report, I asked about how Mr. Fitzpatrick was to be treated, and she advised he was not appointable. And I asked about him being in the talent pool, and she said, no, he's not appointable. And I did not have any basis for that, but I was asked to indicate that in the selection report.
Would you, I guess, as a recruiter looking at it now, do you think there's been significant reputation damage done to a few people throughout this process?
I think the process has been very difficult for a lot of people, and I particularly feel for the candidates whose interest in these things has been exposed, and it makes it very difficult then for really good people who want to come into a process if it's not confidential and if their interest can be exposed in the way that it is. That I think is very regrettable, and it may well impact the quality of candidates who might be attracted to working in government. And that's an area I've done a lot of work in and very proud of it, and find that we have increasing interest in people working in government or for purpose organisations, and it's been fantastic. And you will see that in the other appointees to the other stick roles, all really high quality people who have really interesting careers and who have all, I might say, as has Mr Webster, given up considerable financial remuneration in order to take a role in the service of New South Wales.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Broadbent. Just wanting to return to the process in a sense, and the issue of ministerial appointments, so to speak. So, in your confidential submission, you've outlined as well that there was put to you to be a pause in the process in September of 2021 because of some consideration of it becoming a ministerial appointment. You also outlined that towards the end of 2021 that Investment New South Wales advised you that the appointments for the Americas and Greater China were proceeding as previously, that is that they would be public service rather than ministerial appointments. Could you just outline how that was advised to you and who advised that?
It would have been by phone. I was advised initially, and that is in the public domain, of Ms Brown indicating that there was a pause because it was now being considered that they could be ministerial appointments. That then proceeded to halt the process, and then I was advised later by phone, I believe again, that we could recommence. We had reached the stage of shortlisting we had provided a shortlist recommendations report for the China role, but the panel had not met to decide on that. We had to basically go back to the market because a number of those candidates had taken other roles. But with the Americas process, we were advised that that was going to be a new process and we were starting again.
So you were under no doubt at all that this was a public service process, at
that
least by the
stage,
end of
yeah,
2021?
By the end of 2021 it
and
became...
never proceeded with any expectation after that this would be changed?
No.
No, thank you. And just going back to the client progress report, what level of detail would you have in a client progress report?
We would have the name, title, the last three roles of the candidate, their LinkedIn profile if they had one, and any date at which we were interviewing the candidate. There would not usually be any evaluative comments.
And would you provide any copies, and in this instance, I guess, to Ms West as your contact at that point, would you provide any copies of questions or likely questions you would ask to?
No questions, no CVs, nothing like that was provided at that stage. The questions and the CVs are provided at the... certainly the CVs are provided at the shortlisting stage, which was much later.
Okay, thank you very much.
Right, that's the end of questions. Thank you very much, Dr. Broadbent. That's the end of
Could
our...
I make a short
Yes.
statement?
Yes, you can.
Because I'd particularly like to thank the many public servants and the many others in the community who have reached out to me and highly supported the work that I've been doing. I've received numerous phone calls, SMSs, all sorts of things like that, and I'm very heartened by that. I really appreciate them reaching out, and because I know the quality and nature of the work that we do. Secondly, I would like to really thank our team. They have worked very diligently too, in the sense that Investment New South Wales did not seem to have very good record keeping. We were actually the ones that provided to Investment New South Wales a lot of the documentations, not the emails, but the other documentations to which you've had access. And they wanted them in several different forms and ways, and that has taken quite a bit of time, but I'm pleased to say that we do keep very good records, so we were able to provide all of those documents to which the committee has access. And finally, I thank the committee for the opportunity to answer questions, and we'll come back to you with those that are questions on notice.
Thank you very much, Dr. Broadbent. John, did you have?
Yeah, can I just put one issue to you just to get your view? The committee's got to make a decision about the publication of the statement you provided. I think it's fair to say we have found your evidence very forthright and very specific today, so I do want to thank you for that. We've, in general, we have decided to publish almost all of the material that's been put to the committee, and that's the general approach we would like to take. It would also avoid us having to recall you if we want to put any of the minor, what I would describe as the secondary details that are in this statement you've provided. However, we're open to any guidance you want to provide to us at this point about a view before we make that decision.
My preference, strong preference, is that that's not published in full. It's the sort of detail we would not normally provide. I have provided it to the committee on the basis of the need to understand the full context of many issues, plus the fact that some evidence has been given that I believe is incorrect and or incomplete. So my request is that the 9-page document not be produced as such. I'm very comfortable with you asking questions on the basis of it today, because I felt that it was important that you understand more of that context.
Well,
Okay.
the committee will make a
Yes.
decision about that after this.
Yeah, we've heard from Dr. Broadbent now. So thank you very much, Dr. Broadbent. As you indicated, you have taken some questions on notice, and the Secretariat will be in touch with you about that, and you may receive some additional questions from the committee in terms of supplementary questions as well, which the Secretariat will notify you of. So once again, thank you so much. We really appreciate you making the time and being a witness to this important inquiry. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
The committee will now break, and we will be back at 3:30. Mr. Smith, how are you?
Good, Madam Chair. How do you do?
Are we right to go? Yes. All right. Okay. We will now commence our next session with Honourable Warwick Smith AO. If you could please state your name and position title and the capacity in which you're appearing today, and swear either an oath or an affirmation. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Warwick Leslie Smith. I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God.
Thank you very much, Mr. Smith. Now, would you like to make a short opening statement for the committee?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to say a few words quickly. Thank you for inviting me to give evidence today. I'm one of the independent members of the selection panels for the Senior Trade and Investment Commissioner roles and have been involved for some time. I was asked to be on the selection panels given my wide experience in international relations, trade and business over many years and for at least 2 decades. I'm a member of the Business Council of Australia's and chair of the Business Council of Australia's Global Engagement and Security Committee for the last nearly 4 years. I was previously the chairman of the Australia-China Council for over 8 years and was the founding chair of the National Foundation of Australia-China Relations. I am on a number of other boards, and I think someone might have circulated that background. I have assisted with the promotion of trade and investment in Australia in other capacities, such as at federal level. With Austrade for many years, my role on selection panels was a voluntary one and arises from my commitment to the promotion of trade and investment in New South Wales and Australia, and I'm happy to assist the inquiry today.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll proceed to questions from the opposition, and we'll start with Mr. Graham.
Great. Thank you for your appearance today, Mr. Smith. I might just firstly ask you, you served as the independent panel member on both the sets of selection panels for the Americas position. That's correct, isn't it?
Right. Make sure I get your name, Mr. Graham.
Yes.
Yep. Yeah, I served on the first panel for the Americas, second panel for the Americas, the panel for the China, the panel for the Middle East, panel for the United Kingdom, and the panel for Japan.
Yeah. No, thank you.
So all of them.
And
as an independent member.
Yes.
Voluntarily, unpaid. Yeah. Just to be clear.
Oh, it's a lot of work.
We know.
And that independent member, the head inquiry sets out quite clearly, is defined as independent of the hiring agency, and you met that. You clearly met that criteria.
So the hiring agency being the state, and sometimes terminology, and also NGS, but I don't have anything to do with NGS other than see them in the context of these matters. And the hiring agency, I am subsequently been placed on a board by the state government called the Investment Attraction Council, which has myself and a range of other business leaders on it. It's been going for a little while, and you will know about those. So
and
that again is voluntary.
It'd be fair to say that you're a well-regarded member of the business and investment and trade community over time, as you've
Mr. Graham,
outlined in
please
those.
read that into the record again. Yes, well regarded. My own view, but anyway, that's up to others, isn't it?
Well, I certainly think that that's a view that's been put to committee
you're very
members.
generous. Thank you.
It's also true you served previously as a federal member of Parliament.
Yeah, look, I was in Canberra for nearly 17 years, but I left that role 24 years ago and changed my... I moved here to the mainland, and I don't mind you people, you're not too bad.
Welcome.
But I've been 24 years getting used to you. But I was in Tasmania, and then I became a business person. I went to the Macquarie Bank for 10 years.
Can you move your microphone forward, please?
Went to the Macquarie Bank for 10 years, how's that?
Yeah.
And then to ANZ, and then also as a continuing senior executive in a range of areas, particularly around Australian Capital Equity, which owns Channel 7 and Boral and a range of other things which you were being circulated.
Yeah. In the head report, as a result of the DPC inquiry, have you had a chance to lok through that report?
Look, I only got it yesterday, but so I read it last night in anticipation of this meeting. So I've had the chance to look at that.
The report at page 47 reports about the opportunities that the two independent members of the panel had at various aspects, and the fact they had very little involvement in some aspects of the process here. And I'll just briefly detail them. That's the fact you had no involvement in the or knowledge of these things that you were asked to sign the report after the job had been offered and contract negotiations have been concluded. You were not told about the nature and extent of the discussions between Ms Brown and Minister Ayres, or the views the Minister had expressed, the nature and extent of the informal reference checking, how those checks had factored into Ms Brown's thinking about the relative rankings. You were not shown earlier drafts of the selection panel report, or that Ms Cole had met with Minister Ayres. All these things are on the record in the DPC report. Do you agree with those observations?
Two things to say. I certainly agree with everything that I read in Graham Head's report and with all of those observations. And furthermore, I'd make the point that in terms of process, obviously I'm not involved in the process. My involvement was to turn up, to listen, to make comment on the day, which were collected and collated and put into reports. But the second STC arrangements were, as you saw and as you read, somewhat different to what had transpired previously in all other activity.
And do you have concerns, given that you were not told about each of those things that Mr Head has detailed in his reports
yes,
that you
do.
want to put on the record?
Yes, I do, and I reflected that to my other independent colleague on the panel. That's the second panel, recalling that I was on both panels, and that we were both bypassed. That's my view. Bypassed, and I wasn't happy about it.
And one of the views that has been put out publicly, unattributed, is that panel members might have felt used. Did you feel used in this process in any way?
Well, I'm no stranger to politics, even though I've been distant from it for some time, and I just want to assure you I don't feel the urge to go back again, even though it's a lovely building.
We're relieved to hear that.
But yes, you have to say that having been through all the other processes, and it was fairly engaging when you make your thing and they come back, and then to get a note one day and say, please sign here, nearly 2 months after you'd had the interview anyway, seemed to me to be used or being taken for granted. There's two ways to look at this. I'm not unused to, in the commercial world or the political world, to not be fully consulted on every aspect of particular issues, and I wasn't involved in detail in the process. But there are elements of these processes. You're dealing with people's futures, you're dealing with the state's futures, and there's a requirement for fairness and openness and transparency, which is really been the hallmark of most of these processes, to successfully get the right people in the right place in accord with what is a very good strategy, enhance the capability of New South Wales to sell services and product and bring investments.
For these important roles.
These are important roles. It's an important strategy. And
in relation to those standards of fairness, openness, transparency, would you agree that they failed in this particular instance?
Well, it's certainly, it's not just me saying it, is it? An independent person has come to that conclusion, and I don't know Mr Graham Head well. I've had the occasional reason to see him over many years on different issues, but I was very keen to read his report when it came out, and it articulates far more clearly than what I could, with a deeper capacity and time for forensic consideration, that should be embraced. And I thought that I agree with that, and I agreed also with Katrina Lowe, who I'd never met before until the day I sat in the panel, who came separately by a different route with different responsibilities in our community to the same conclusion.
And Katrina Lowe put a stronger position in some ways. She said this, and this is reported in the Head report. Ms Lowe in particular has indicated that she would not have completed the process by signing off the selection report had these things been disclosed to her. That is, the 6 or so matters that were not disclosed either to her or to you. Can I put that to you? Knowing what you know now, would you have signed off that selection report had those things been disclosed?
I wouldn't have, and I think I would have said that, and I said that to Katrina Lowe that I 100% agree with her. I had the additional caveat, however, that when I wrote back to the people who sent me this thing to sign on the day, I think I was offshore somewhere, so doing it on the run, and didn't go back and have a look at, just signed it. But I did say I sign it on the understanding that I'm only considering those that appeared before me. on that panel, because I had a view that, from the first panel, that there was a candidate who was strong and who could have done the role, went into consideration and could have been also considered, got very strong international capabilities, which these roles required. So I only did it with that caveat, based on that consideration. So I did have a reservation on two counts.
And I think my colleague might come back to that specific point. I just want to ask you also, at multiple times, this has been described as being at arm's length from government, that ministers have not taken an interest in these roles. In your time on the panel, in your time, your travels, what is your view about the level of interest that ministers took in who was being appointed to these roles?
In the ones we're specifically talking about, this one, the STIC second panel, I had no knowledge that there was this deep interest that's subsequently been revealed by the then Trade Minister. Over time, I've travelled with, I think, 4 premiers as a volunteer business person, business council and other things to all of their offshore trade missions and so on. The last trade mission that the current Premier and the Trade Minister took, they didn't take any business people, which is the first time in nearly 10 years. But my sense is that they do take some interest. I mean, these are significant positions, really.
Correct.
Did they, either of them, the Premier, the current Premier or the current Trade Minister, talk to me, text to me, in any way be in touch with me about any of these roles? The answer is no, they didn't. Particularly the Premier. He did talk to me when he was Treasurer, when he was responsible for trade, about the broader strategy, and I spent some time with him about the strategy and the desperate need to upgrade New South Wales' presence in international markets and to build a much more deeper, competent capability in Sydney to service those people, and that those people should be possessed of strong international experience, strategic capability, and that you probably wouldn't find it easily. So therefore you want a robust system of assessment and a robust system of recruitment. Certainly they all agreed with that, that focus, that strategy, and to go forward with it. And it took some time because COVID intervened and selection processes were stopped and started.
But you're saying in all that time discussing the setup of these roles, the importance of them,
it didn't talk about individuals.
You talked about the structure, but at no point in discussions with Dom Perrottet did the discussion turn to who might
individuals, be. And I stress, just in case it's in somebody's mind, I did not apply. I never applied. I did get offered New York once by the previous government, but I'm too young to go offshore. Got more to do here.
Thank you for that assurance.
But
those discussions
so I was
did
not involved
with,
on an individual personal basis. I was just there in my broader capacity.
Those discussions did not happen with you. Did you hear of other expressions of interest or discussions about individuals by ministers in this government?
Not really. No, I don't recall anything.
What do you mean by not really?
I don't recall anyone saying to me, this person should be our person in New York or China or so on.
I mean, there have been a range of names floated publicly, and in some ways I apologise to these candidates, but all of these names have been floated publicly. But people like Chikarovsky, Goward, McKay, Barilaro, Remo Nogarotto's name came up at one point. You're saying none of that speculation made it to your ears.
But I do know that from subsequent events from Jodie Mackay, Prue Goward and Chikarovsky, they were all encouraged to apply, they've told me. And I didn't know about Remo Nogarotto, but none of the others. Sometimes the recruiters ask me, a lot of it, mainly because I'm federally focused, a lot of it comes, who might be a good person for Austrade in China is a recent one, for example, in Japan and so on. Sometimes I'm asked to consider names, and I was on a panel for Austrade prior to then doing a global review of Austrade's activities, which is probably in the list of things that I've done.
And when you look at the, Graham Head came to this conclusion that it was not fair to characterise this process as been at arm's length. Do you agree with that conclusion that Mr. Head reached?
Well, as I said, I agree with his report. Yeah, I do.
Thank you.
Mr. Smith, I might just a few more questions about the Sticks America's position, if you don't mind. Just wanted to cover off a few other details of the head report, just so your position is clear and on the record. The head report says that you had no discussions about the Stick America's roles with panel members after the interviews, and you did not re-engage with the process until you were provided with the final selection panel report to sign 2 days prior to the announcement of Mr. Barilaro's appointment. That's on page 41 of the report. That's correct, isn't it?
Yeah, so we're talking about the second report?
Yes.
Yeah, so we had the interview, of which Barilaro was part of, and the other people were there, and that from that day until I received the, it was nearly 2.5 months, 3 months, like no contact at all, which, actually surprised me a little bit. It won't surprise you, as someone who's an experienced former person in public life, that there was some element of surprise to have self-described Crocodile Dundee of Queanbeyan and want to go to New York. My sense is that that I didn't hear from anybody until the day I'm told to sign it and asked to sign it, and not even by the government, by the recruiter.
Can we just
I found that quite extraordinary, to be honest with you. Just
What,
expressing personal view. But
sure. Can we just table the document that's tender bundled titled W. Smith at the top, if you don't mind? Providing to the witness. Thank you very much. And I think, Mr. Smith, if you can go to page 32 of that bundle, if you don't mind. There's only really one detail I wanted to ask you about. Are you there?
Yep.
Okay.
Sorry.
See, this is the exchange which you're asked to prove the report. And you see, starting from the bottom, you receive an email from a person at NGS Global on the 15th of June 2022 at 12:52 p.m. from Melbourne time. It says to you, dear Warwick, I've just been sent this file from Investment New South Wales today asking for panel confirmation of agreement for this final version by all panel members. If it's possible to have an email back as soon as possible confirming the same, they are requesting today if possible. I will add this email confirmation. So you see that?
Yep.
And then you can see, you said you were offshore at the time?
Look, I'd have to check my diary. I think I was.
Do you know where you were?
In Dubai.
Sorry?
And no, in Dubai.
In Dubai.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but we'll check the calendar. But and I said the candidates for the panel that were interviewed for the role.
So presumably, if you're in Dubai, you're a couple of hours behind. So it's probably 4 a.m. or thereabouts at your time where you are, or perhaps even earlier. Maybe about 6 a.m. I think, Dubai time, when you get this email. And then you do turn it around within 3.5 hours. You see that at the top? You reply back at 4:46 Melbourne time, I believe. Is that your understanding? It was about 4 hours?
I'd have to check my calendar, but the main thing is I responded.
You did?
Yeah.
And Mr. Smith, I congratulate you on the promptness of your response.
I'm generally pretty good.
You are. But you say in your email, thanks for chat to the person. Did you actually speak to this person that day?
Look, I don't recall, but if I said I did, I might have rung to say I'm very surprised.
Okay. And you expressed your surprise out of the blue of receiving this.
Yeah.
And at this point, you weren't aware that Mr. Barilaro was to be announced 2 days later, were you?
No, and as I subsequently read, he already had the job before he even asked to sign this.
How did you feel when you learnt that he had already had the job before you were asked to sign this?
Well, I think I've already expressed that. Surprise.
Would you have expected to be asked to endorse the report before Investment New South Wales had endorsed the candidate?
Our normal process was that they would respect independent panel members and the panel and give them the chance to have any further say or input.
So did you feel disrespected?
Clearly.
Thank you. And you clearly, the point that you made to Mr. Head, which is the same point you made to us, is referenced in that email, in which I think the exact words you use I agree that Jay Barilaro is the preferred candidate of those the panel interviewed for a role in New York. You were referring there to the exclusion of Mr. Fitzpatrick, were you not?
Well, Yes, I was, because I went through the first process, and he was a very good candidate, and fitted well the sense of what I thought the original strategy and the continuing strategy was, to elevate New South Wales' presence in international market with people of deep capacity that could really add to investment opportunity
And you were
trade
the only
growth.
you were the only member of the second panel who was on the first panel, correct?
Yeah, that's right. That even made me more concerned.
Just on that,
Had a sense of being isolated.
yes, well, you knew a lot. Can I just directly to that? Did it ever explain to you what happened to you? Obviously, were on the first panel. Recommended Jenny West for that role. Signed off on that quite happily.
We recommended Miss West and Fitzpatrick equally to be considered.
This is what I'm trying to unpack. And was it ever explained to you what happened to Jenny West and why she was no longer the preferred candidate?
I never had it fully explained to me by anyone. Jenny West was capable and could do the job, and she had a deep understanding because she had been building the strategy. She'd been hired by the then Treasurer and his department to build this strategy. She had a deep understanding of what had to be done in New South Wales, and she'd worked in some areas, not a deep CV, but she'd worked in some areas offshore, and so she could do the job, and she came for consideration from circumstances that wasn't made aware to me as to why she applied, but she was capable of doing it. And whoever they bring before the panel, we assess them and give responses to it. And so I gave that response on the basis that she was strong on the New South Wales and the strategy, and New York. All locations are equal in importance, but New York is particularly important one because of the dimension of the market. And she could do that, and I understood that she was off and going, and then it turns around that she wasn't.
But it was never really explained to you the circumstances that
No,
occurred.
I don't really have a view.
I also have questions.
And just the last one, just is given that the other positions, there's this change around the 27th of September. There was this issue around them becoming ministerial appointments, and then obviously Jenny West was unwound. But then India and ASEAN, I think that's right, were then continued through that process. You never understood. You were never discussed why that or how that happened.
It was not raised at any of the other panels, and the Middle East, India, and Singapore, and then subsequently China.
Yep.
And I think you probably come to it, but I think so London all went according to the normal way I'd expect things to happen.
I'll just proceed with some of the same lines of questioning, Mr. Smith. So with the first recruitment process, you're saying the panel put forward Mr. Fitzpatrick and Ms. West as both suitable candidates for the role.
Yep.
Did you have the situation then that once there was a decision made, or were you involved in the decision ultimately to appoint Ms. West? Did the panel reconvene to make that decision?
Not that I recall, no.
Did you receive a draft selection panel report for the first recruitment round to have a look?
I believe we do the thing, and then they send us something. Do you agree with this? And I believe I did, but to be honest with you, I don't take notes to walk away with, and I don't keep all the material. I make my observations on the day and give it to the panel, and they put it in and they come back with it. And if they want subsequent feeling or to check referees, to be a referee sometimes in the past, what do you think of this? That would be the normal way. But
and so the difference between
you would have the paper trail, which would be more accurate.
Yeah, which is you're the witness today, so trying to get your evidence on it, of course. So the difference between the first recruitment round and the second recruitment round, from your point of view, in terms of the involvement of the panel, you had more involvement in the first recruitment round in terms of your views were considered. Just talk us through what you perceive as the main differences between those two rounds.
Oh, the second interview panel, if you're an independent person, you didn't get consulted or discussed with until you got asked to sign here 2.5 months later.
And just to be clear, after the contract was already offered.
Well, that's what I understand from Graham Head's report, which I think is the definitive assessment of the chronology and the timelines. Yeah.
Yes, so that's the
So
yes,
far.
that's the chronology, and I think Ms. Lowe also confirmed that Mr. Barilaro had signed the contract before you had signed off on that selection report that was sent to you that you had several hours to sign off on. Can I just check as well, with the email that Mr. Mookie was referring to earlier, that you were asked by the CEO, the Executive Officer of NGS Global to sign off on the final selection panel report, where you say you agree that Jay Barilaro is the preferred candidate of those the panel interviewed for a role in New York. Above that, you say, thanks for chat, and then the person's name, who doesn't need to be mentioned, the executive officer, thanks for chat. So you picked up the phone and had a conversation with somebody at NGS Global when you received the selection panel report?
I think I might have done it, I just don't recall, but if I've said it in there, I probably did, even if I was onshore or offshore, because I was surprised to receive it and get the hurry up to turn it around on the day after such a long period. But be that as it may, my thought was that you could only make comment about those that you interviewed. And then the other thing that I would say is that NGS, I've had a long time to see them. So if they were of a view that it should be sent to a panel and it was time to sign, I would follow them. I found them to be possessed of high levels of integrity and capability in all the different things I've done with them, state-wise and federally. So whilst I was surprised, I felt no reason why I would be not able to sign, but making the clear distinction between I'm signing on those who were physically in the room and interviewed. And Mr. Fitzpatrick wasn't.
And
I think Graham Head describes it well. His candidacy was orphaned. He was the first time up and was good enough to do it. Second time he was able to apply, but was never interviewed, and I don't know why.
And so this conversation that you had when you realised that you were being asked to sign the first time you'd seen a selection panel report several months later, almost 3 months after interview.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact time, but it was certainly a long time.
You didn't think to call Investment New South Wales, like Amy Brown or Kylie Bell, because I understand you're kind of more engaged with them. Is that correct? Or your call to the recruitment agency, to NGS?
Yeah, well, they're the one who sent me a letter and asked me to sign. So, I'm assuming that they're acting on behalf of those officers, and those officers hadn't been in touch with me about this issue since we had the last panel. They were both on the panel. Amy and Kylie were both on the panel.
So it doesn't sound like you were very happy to be asked to sign this selection panel. And you said that to NGS Recruitment. You weren't happy.
Yeah, I wasn't happy. But I signed it. But I only signed it because that was the recommendation that they'd received, that NGS had provided to me. But I did it with a caveat that I'm only signing on the basis of those that appeared before me. So I thought there was another candidate should have been considered, was capable of doing it.
Did you let anybody else know your concerns at the time?
At the time, no. It's up to them to pass it on, not up to me. No one from the state government got in touch with me on any of this. Still haven't.
And let's be clear as well in terms of Katrina Lowe's evidence to this inquiry in relation to Mr. Fitzpatrick not being considered in the selection panel. It was she told the committee that it was at the suggestion of the chair originally, so the suggestion of Ms. Amy Brown, that the panel agreed not to re-interview Fitzpatrick. Did you You being the only person plus Amy, I think, was it that had interviewed him previously, or was it just you?
I don't remember saying, I agree, just dump this person. I don't agree to that. I don't agree I ever said that or intimated that. It's a decision of the chair. Well, it's a decision for me. They make the decision who comes before the panel. If they didn't want them there, that's a matter for them. But I felt, given that he had a prior interview and he had formally reapplied, that he clearly still interested and he meets that broad criteria of capability that'd be good for the state to consider. And the state didn't consider. That's a matter for them, not a matter for me. I just passed the observation.
And the first recruitment process, just to be clear, so you were on there, and
Yes.
Ms. Brown was on the panel
Yep.
for the first one.
Yep.
So it was you and Ms. Brown who had interviewed Mr. Fitzpatrick in the past.
Yep.
Did you have assurances at any time by Ms. Brown that Mr. Fitzpatrick's all of his credentials and qualification, and essentially the first recruitment process, that first interview, would be given equal consideration with other people being interviewed? Can you recall that?
Chair, I don't recall having been told that, but it's implicit in how the process works that they do their reference checks before, as they come in, and they do the reference checks on the process. So I leave that's part of the process of which I'm not part of. I look at the CV that's provided, see the people and talk with them. Either some of them have been online, obviously, been awkward to do some of them over that period. But as to whether or not they're suitable to go forward, or if there's something in the CV that they don't wish to share with a panel that might come up later or through other searches, that would be a matter for process, and I can only pass an observation on what I see before me, which I did.
Thank you. And when did you start, just in a general sense, sitting on selection panels for the public service as an independent panel member? When?
Look, this current round of this strategy goes back to probably, 2019, might have been earlier. All the prior premiers, and that was O'Farrell, Baird and Berejiklian, one way or another, I was involved voluntarily on trade issues, partly because I did so much in trade globally over a long period of time. I think I even did something with a previous Premier, Yemmer and Keneally. I have to go back, I can't remember. But it's a passion. Trade enhancement, trade engagement is a passion. I'm volunteer for the Business Council now and sit on their board to do this role, to articulate and do a lot with Austrade and DFAT and security agencies, federal security agencies, which have a strong interface with a lot of things we do to understand the dilemmas and the opportunities and so on with regard to trade, both in services and product and merchandise trade.
Thank you. So, how was the appointment? Who can you remember who approached you from government? How was that originally done in terms of somebody approaching you saying we need an independent?
Yes, I do remember. It was during the period that this first strategy was put up by the then Treasurer and his secretary, who had come from, I think he was called the Services Commissioner, had come in to be Secretary of Treasury.
So when Dominic Perrottet, when you're saying then Treasurer?
He was the Minister of the Treasury. The Treasury had taken on the trade portfolio and had been reshaping it to have these types of upgraded roles and upgraded secretariat. And then a little later on, for reasons I've got no idea about, it swapped over and went back to Premier Berejiklian, and then of course there was a change, and then it went to Minister Ayres, who back some years had been a trade minister. All of those issues I'm not involved in, wasn't asked about it, not consulted about it, but I was asked by the Secretary of the then Treasury to consider going on to these panels and they were going to set up a board and so on, which subsequently I think has now been set up where I now sit. They call it an attraction board, which sits under.
What's the official name of that committee or board?
I think it's New South Wales Financial Attraction Board.
Attraction?
Financial Attraction Board, yeah, something like that. And it reports, has a chairman, Jeff, what's his name? He runs
Jeff Roberts?
West.
Jeff Roberts?
Yes, yeah, Jeff Roberts. And then the secretary is, secretary of the department is Amy Brown, and it reported to Stuart Ayres, who...
So at the time it was Amy Brown contacted you when Amy.
No.
Sorry.
No,
just trying to get clear.
This was before her.
Okay.
This was
Who was the
Secretary
secretary?
Pratt, was
Who?
it?
Secretary. That's him. Yeah, Secretary Pratt. Yeah.
Okay, Secretary Pratt under Treasurer Perrottet.
That's right. Yeah.
And you had a history working relationship with Secretary Pratt or Dominic Perrottet, Treasurer Perrottet, then Treasurer Perrottet, to be approached.
I really didn't know Michael Pratt, and I still don't really know him. But and Perrottet, I could hardly say I know him. I was just recognised by their departments and their trade people over a long period of time as someone who interfaced and participated with premiers and trade on a voluntary basis to assist and develop. And all the time that I was doing my banking career particularly, I was always involved and engaged. So I think I was on everybody's list to chat to. And, fundamentally, Chair, my big focus was North Asia, so China, Korea, Japan, wherein lie a lot of our trade opportunities, both to retention of that trade and also building out our presence in that market in a competitive way with the other states, particularly New South Wales. We're a little bit behind Queensland, and we're a little bit behind Victoria in terms of in-market presence, and that was the thing that drove me. New South Wales, it's the sixth largest economy in the Asian vertical, and so it's a hugely significant economy, and it's so diversified that it needs to do well and it can do better. So that was what was driving it, and Pratt was quite receptive to that. He'd been a banker and he'd worked in Asia, so he was nice and receptive to my ideas, really. So, yeah.
Thank you. Just wanted to just get your understanding of the way in which, being on the selection panel for these roles, the way in which the exemption from the GSE Act in terms of Section 10A, where the senior trade roles are exempt from merit selection, if you like, which is what we've heard a couple of times. When you were assessing, therefore, the candidates for these senior trade roles, were you diligently assessing them against the public sector capability framework? Were you scoring them against various capabilities? How did you go about it if what we were told is that actually you didn't really have to mark them against merit according to the public sector capability framework?
Look, Chair, I didn't follow the public service process. I was not in the panel to do that. I was in it because I know and continue to know about trade and opportunity and the type of people that you need to be effective in the marketplace. It was the process within government that would have to determine it. They would set down their strategy, their parameters, and I would look at those things. But I didn't refer to Section 10 once.
You weren't assessing against a set of criteria during interviews?
No. Well, we had set questions that NGS had worked with, for example, and make sure those criteria were part of it. And we'd set the questions so that we covered the field. But then I would also add in my sort of assessment of what I thought the capability was, the presence, the demeanour and track record, all of those things, which don't always get captured in an act, and that was part of the attraction of trying to uplift the capability in the field by going for a higher capable person. And so that was my role. Their role, they were in charge of process. And I don't comment about it, didn't interfere with it. But then I did see that there was a variation in that last piece.
Thank you. I'm done with questions to the opposition.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Smith, I might just pick up on one of the questions that the Chair asked. You were approached, was it by Mr. Pratt directly to serve in this role?
To be honest, I think it might have been, because I think I might have asked to go and see him in his role as Treasury Secretary about my pet hobby horse of wanting to, you've got a new Trade Minister, now's the time. Treasury is a more powerful, I think your shadow Treasury, you know what I'm saying, it has more capability to perhaps make things happen.
Allegedly.
You may find out one day. That what this was about was trying to get this to move. So
you had a meeting with Mr. Pratt.
I didn't ask him for a job, but by telling him politely what I thought he should do, you can tell I'd tell you what I think.
I presume this was presumably sometime towards late 2019?
Yeah, probably. It was sort of before COVID.
Yep. And the first role that is recruited, the first two roles, is the Agent General in the United Kingdom and the Stick Commissioner in Tokyo, correct?
Yes. I think Tokyo was probably the first.
Yeah. Now, we've ascertained that from earlier today that a process around the Agent General commences in early 2020 that is then suspended as a result of the COVID pandemic. That's accords with your recollections?
Yeah, there was a delay, yeah.
Yep. And then the process resumes sometime in the third quarter of 2020, and then the selection panel convenes, settles upon one particular candidate who then withdraws and then goes towards the other candidate who was capable of appointment. Is that your understanding too?
Yeah, I think because it was the opposite to truncated is elongated. So it was an elongated process, and I think other candidates and other people were put to the committee.
So we've established that by the end of late 2020, early 2021, the selection panel has interviewed a variety of candidates and chosen Mr. Paul Webster as your preferred candidate. Does that accord with your recollections?
Yeah, he was good. He was already in the United Kingdom, so of those that were in front of us, he was probably a good run-up start, if you know what I mean. There'd been no Agent General from New South Wales for 30 years.
Indeed. And then we learned as well earlier today that the conversations with Mr. Webster progressed to the point of his details around his salary as well as his other entitlements. I presume you weren't aware or you weren't engaged at that level?
I don't go near the process or near the money. I mean, I know that sometimes those things are contentious, particularly if you're going to bring people from business into the government. It's a different atmosphere, a different process, but that's never been part of the remit that I was involved in.
We then learned that after the panel has already decided that Mr. Webster is your preferred candidate, in the aftermath of a meeting which takes place for, I believe it was the Tokyo position, Secretary Pratt informs the recruiter that Mr. Stephen Cartwright is a person who's now a candidate for the role. You were on the Japan panel, were you?
Yes.
Okay. Do you by any chance recall when that meeting took place?
Look, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I mean, I didn't know if I can go back and get the department to give me some dates.
That's okay. I think we can find out elsewhere.
But basically, Japan was a good process, and it ended up being a very good candidate, and from the marketplace.
Indeed. Did you have any conversations in or around that time in which Secretary Pratt expressed to you any dissatisfaction with Paul Webster as a candidate for the UK job?
Not that I recall, no.
Okay. Were you aware that Mr. Pratt had recommended Stephen Cartwright to the recruiter as a person who should enter the process?
No, I wasn't. No, but Cartwright's quite good. I've seen him
in
the past.
We'll get to that. But at this point, were you given any explanation at all as to why Mr. Webster was not, from anybody, as to why he was not a suitable person to go forward?
Not that I recall, no. I mean, I do recall later conversations where Cartwright was there, and how do we attract and keep Webster, because he's particularly strong in Europe, and you'd be losing a good person, I think, was
Sure.
the view of some of us, and that, I
Panel reconvenes on the 30th of March to interview Stephen Cartwright. That's correct, is it?
I take it on the date, yeah, but it did have Cartwright in front of it.
And he was the only person on that day who you interviewed, correct?
I'll have to take your word, but I don't recall.
Or do you recall interviewing anybody else?
Yep, I don't recall there being others. There were others that were originally in the
Sure.
the
So
mix.
between February 15-ish, we'll go from February 10 to February 15 to March 30, were you at all, presumably someone contacted you to say, hey, the panel needs to reconvene to consider Mr. Cartwright?
Yeah, they would do that through my office. Where they need me, they go to my office, and then it's scheduled. And thank you very much for accommodating my timetable today, Madam Chair. It's appreciated.
And at this point, the panel consists of you, Miss West, as a representative of the New South Wales Treasury, and Soon Investment New South Wales, Mr. Tim Reardon and Mr. Mike Pratt. That's correct?
Yeah, I did a few interviews with Reardon was in Premier and Cabinet, and Pratt was the Treasury Secretary, and I forget who else was there.
So, at that meeting on the 30th, perhaps, did anybody give you a reason as to why all of a sudden you would all had been reconvened to consider Mr. Cartwright's candidacy?
Other than I don't recall, but other than the fact that he was regarded as potentially a good candidate who met the sense of, what you needed for the Agent General was a real gravitas, really, and deep commercial capability. He sort of fitted the bill, so I imagine that's why they brought him in.
But no one actually told you what the error was with Mr. Webster or how Mr. Cartwright managed to enter that process?
I don't know how he entered the process, but then quite often, even though there's cut-off times, extra people come in and some people go out. And what I'm concerned about is you get quality candidates in front of us.
Did you have a relationship with Mr. Cartwright yourself, by any chance?
I know Cartwright from his time at the business, because he was there for a long time, Business Council, and he had my best recollection. I spent a bit of time with him on their prospect of opening an office in Dalian in China.
Did you ever have discussions about his future career options after he left Business New South Wales?
I think he was still at the business when he talked with me, but that was in the context of my China meetings.
Did he seek advice from you about his future career prospects?
Yeah, a lot of people do.
And did he?
I can't recall.
Did he discuss?
He came with somebody else to see me, so I don't think I would have done an intimate on.
Did he discuss with you at all his interest in potentially serving in the New South Wales government at all, at any level?
I think it would have been, I think it was raised that, New South Wales, they're thinking of leaving there and going into government, but not specifically about any particular role. We had other people that from time to time I'd seen that, ex-lawyers and accountants and so on, that were always urged to go and talk to particular secretaries about what their prospects might be.
Indeed, but did he speak at all in this? Do you recall when particularly he was seeking your career advice? Just when in time?
It would have been the time that he was seeing me about wanting to open an office in Dalian.
So when? Who was wanting to open an office in Dalian?
His organisation.
Right. So when was that?
I didn't think you'd be asking this. I'd have to go back and check, but it was. It would be probably before this process was underway. It would have been pre-COVID.
Okay, so your recollection is
just to be clear, I'm quite keen to see that business open an office in China. At that stage, we were a little more hopeful about outcomes in
What business
Dalian.
are you referring to?
Dalian. We're going to open an office that linked to shipping, and subsequently, it's only just recently, a new shipping line's opened up out of Dalian into China, and they were going to link and try and build out their linkages for mid-level business out of New South Wales. It was a fairly good strategy, and I was going to help through connectivity to work out how that might happen.
Pre-COVID, Mr. Cartwright is the CEO of Business New South Wales. Is
Yeah.
that the basis upon which you were meeting with him?
Yep, and he had some people in there.
Yeah. Did you recall having any meeting with him in 2020 in which he was seeking your career advice?
I don't recall it, but I can always have a look. Yep.
Could you? On notice, do you mind?
Not at all.
Do you specifically recall a conversation or a time you had a coffee with Mr. Cartwright in which he was seeking your advice about the appropriate remuneration standards of high-level government appointments?
Hey, it could have been in that if we had a conversation, he would have raised money.
So, do you recall specifically providing him with advice that would benchmark expectations according to other similar roles, be it, for example, the New Zealand High Commissioner and how that person is remunerated?
No, I don't recall that. I wouldn't have any idea what they were remunerated.
So, just to be clear,
I don't follow government, rem. All I know is that you're dedicated in what you do, and the community doesn't appreciate you to the full extent that they might. But
Indeed. Well, for what it's worth, as Shadow Treasurer, I've had some collations with government
it's
remuneration
going to
these
land
days.
on your desk one day. Probably.
Indeed. But can I just ask you, Mr. Smith, again, do you recall specifically having a discussion? So I think we can establish that there was some discussion in 2020 with Mr. Cartwright.
I don't know. I'll have to. I mean, you asked the question. I'm quite happy to be obliging and check and find out. We keep records of most meetings that take place.
Well, I guess I'm putting to you that there was a discussion in 2020 in which...
I do a lot of discussion. I don't remember him because he's not what you'd call a close colleague or a friend or anything.
No, and of course, I accept that, Mr. Smith. But you recall having some discussion with him in which, amongst other items, you were discussing, or he was asking your advice as to what would be the appropriate levels of remuneration for a person who would serve in a trade commissioner role.
I think, well, I don't recall, but if he was talking to me about the context of China leaving, what would the marketplace, what would he do after, I don't know how many years he was there, 10, 15 years or something? Where does he build another career? Well, the options were, there's government, there's market, there's banks, I'm a specialist on banks,
Okay. Was that the
consulting
only...
firms and so on. But
Okay.
no, if I give a lot of advice to a lot of people, I don't recall.
And look, Mr. Smith, I'm not suggesting for you that you providing advice to any person is at all inappropriate. It's legitimate.
Quite happy to do it, but I run a roaring trade, assisting people.
Indeed. But in respect to this particular conversation that you may have had with Mr. Cartwright, at that point, did he indicate to you an interest in working in a role for the New South Wales government, or you can't recall?
I don't recall, but I wasn't working for the New South Wales government in any way, so I'm not recruiting for them.
Okay. And insofar as prior to him lodging his candidacy, did he seek your advice again at all?
Not that I recall, no.
Did you have any conversations with him as a candidate independently of the panel?
Not that I recall, no.
And insofar as, I guess, any disclosures to the panel, did you have to make any disclosures to the panel prior to you agreeing to interview him on the 30th of March?
I don't believe I did, but I don't believe I needed to. There was other candidates that I knew that I declared an interest or a conflict or a relationship. So,
okay. And
so normally, look, if you're a businessman and a banker, you understand conflicts of interest and the personal relationships should be disclosed. It's a matter of course. It's generally a first item of an agenda for meetings of any conflict. So quite practiced at that. I knew the guy that went to Japan not well. He'd once been in one of my broader teams at Macquarie Bank. You declare those things. But Cartwright was not a personal colleague, not a professional business colleague, but had the prospect of being very helpful with regard to building out a China basis for mid-level businesses, which would have been good and timely. And so very encouraging if he followed up and had chats, and I'll check, that would have been one of those normal issues, and the prospect of the range of things that someone like him could do would be quite broad.
okay.
And then when he came before us, his track record was quite strong.
Okay.
In business, which was an item of key focus for doing the role. And then London takes on a sort of a significance because the New South Wales was going back into that area, and it was clear that I think it was in part of the criteria, no politicians for London again. which personally I find a bit sad, but really because I think some former parliamentarians can do good work in these sorts of roles and do it very successfully, and many have, and many continue to do so. But it was felt that you needed someone with a strong commercial capability.
Okay. And just again, when you agreed, did you actually agree on the 30th that Mr. Cartwright's candidacy should progress?
If he was coming before us, and I would be keen. And then when he did come, I rated him highly.
And but at no point did you ever conclude that Mr. Webster was incapable of doing the role?
My sense is that Webster could have done the role, and I would have been happy for him doing the role. But if there was a better candidate, it should be considered. And then, when you had both of them sitting there, the penny dropped. You could have both of them sitting there, one doing Europe and one doing the UK and Israel, and you had the benefit of both, and you covered the market. And what happened in the UK is that once they pulled out of Europe, the UK, then there was some vacant space that needed to be filled. So how do you actually, in a Brexit environment, cover that ground successfully? There's some thoughts about that within the Austrade model as well. So it wasn't as though I came to these views. It wasn't just a virgin thought. So working through that thought process is my feeling was that you had a very strong presence and capability in Cartwright, and a very, very strong technical capability of someone who'd long been in the UK. It wasn't from New South Wales. It was might have been originally, but there's many, many years, and so we could capture both of those capabilities. That would be a win-win for New South Wales.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I might just take pick up from the Americas line of questioning, if you don't mind, and just take you through some documents and just get your reaction, just so we can have it, please, if you don't mind. Do you have that tender bundle?
Sorry?
Do you have that tender bundle in front of you?
This one here.
Yeah.
Yep.
Do you mind just turning to page 12?
Sure.
You just see, we'll start at the bottom. You can see there's a highlighted section. This is a correspondence that Miss Broadbent sends to Miss Brown. Sorry, Dr. Broadbent sends to Miss Brown, in which she's sending the draft selection panel report and references to her. And you can just see at the top, Dr. Broadbent says, Amy and Kylie, we weren't sure if you wanted Katharina and Warwick included at this stage, but happy to forward on if appropriate. Attached is the draft selection panel report for the Americas role. Was not sure how you want to do this, but we have done what we thought was in line at the time. And then if you just turn to page 9 and 10, you can see that that's the actual draft report that's the attachment as well. Can I just confirm you never saw this report?
The only report I saw was the one that they sent to me on the day they wanted me to sign. That's as far as I can recall.
Okay. Sorry, I just
Without
wanted...
sort of reading it carefully, but...
Yeah. And just wanted to get that confirmed from you that you hadn't seen it. And you can also just see, if you go to page 11, you can see Secretary Brown. Yes, it is Secretary.
Yep.
Yeah, it is Secretary Brown at this point in time. Her reply, in which she goes, "Thanks for preparing the draft selection report. I've sourced a couple of informal referees for the candidates, which I'll share with the group as they are likely to change." Just to be clear, you weren't aware that there was an informal reference process?
No, but it wouldn't be out of the ordinary to seek and see other referees come in above and beyond what might be provided by a candidate. In fact, it's probably not bad practice to seek broader and wider. So I didn't see that, but I didn't know that, but it wouldn't strike me as being odd.
Sure, and you weren't
In
aware...
fact, I'd find it good due diligence.
And you weren't aware that one of the informal referees was Minister Ayres?
Sorry?
You were not aware that one of the informal referees for Mr. Barilaro was Minister Ayres?
Was I aware of that? No.
Okay, thank you.
No.
Yes.
I'm not aware of that until just now.
Okay, sorry. This has been subject to some commentary in the head review, but just to be clear, until this point in time, you weren't aware that Minister Ayres was one of the informal references for Minister Barilaro.
An informal referee or a...
Informal.
Oh. Well, I suppose they're colleagues, say nice things, wouldn't they?
But you weren't aware of that
No.
until this point. Okay. Fair enough. We might just now go forward, if you don't mind, to page 18. This is the next version of the selection report that we've learnt this morning is prepared following some conversations between Secretary Brown and Dr. Broadbent. Firstly, I presume you haven't seen this either?
I don't believe so.
Yeah, and look, to be fair, there's no evidence to suggest that it was sent to you. But it says this, the panel came to the view that following a review of references, that John had relevant capabilities. And then early up there, you won't be able to see this, but you'll just have to take me at my word. When the immediate sentence above it, you might be able to make it out, but it says... the specific reference that he refers to is the Australian ambassador to the United States, which at the time is Mr. Sinodinos, or Arthur Sinodinos, and then Consul General, which is at that time former Premier Nick Greiner. Was it the case that the references that came from Mr. Sinodinos, Mr. Farrell, former Premier Barry O'Farrell and Secretary Barnes, did the panel think that they were the tipping factor?
Look, I don't know. I know Barnes, but not well. I know O'Farrell very well, and I know Sinodinos pretty well. They're good referees, really. Yeah, they're good referees, but I wouldn't say they were the tipping point. It's going to be performance on the day on the panel.
So the issue is, it says here, the panel came to the view following a review of references.
Solid.
It says here quite explicitly, the panel came to the view that following a review of references, so that John had relevant capabilities and experience for the role. So this report attributes to the panel collectively, that collectively you all concluded that Mr. O'Farrell's reference, Mr. Sinodinos' reference, and Mr. Barnes' reference was effectively the reason why Mr. Barilaro should be preferred over Ms. Cole. Doesn't seem like the panel ever had a collective discussion about this. Is that fair?
I would have. I think they're three very good referees, and if I could get them to write nice things about me, I would ask them, but I can't be sure they would. But my sense
got John
is
Graham's word. That's good enough.
My sense is, through you, Chair, to the panel member, that they were good referees. But in the end, vis-a-vis Miss Cole, that I thought we'd ended up where there were two candidates that should be considered equally, and that was Cole and Barilaro.
But just to be clear here, the panel never collectively came to the view that the references were the deciding factor.
I don't think any panel that I've ever sat on would just say this is the best person based on the strength of the referees. You just don't do that. You have a bigger responsibility against the criteria that, it's Section 10 criteria. Then there's the broader criteria that an independent person like me might bring, that I might have a different view about O'Farrell or about Sinodinos. And certainly over a long 30-year association, I've had many different views with both of them about many things. So I'm not going to make a decision just based on referees. I just would not do that ever.
Okay, but this report said that
I don't mind. I didn't write the report, did
Yeah,
I?
just to be clear, that's why I'm asking you.
Well, there you
Mr.
go. You
Smith.
got your answer. I didn't write the report,
Okay.
and I wasn't asked about it.
And just also to be clear here, if you don't mind just turning to page 44 of that tender bundle.
Sure. Okay.
Final. Yeah. This is the actual final report, which you're asked to endorse in the circumstances in which I think we've already described it. But you can see as well.
So this is the one that Mr. Head says you have seen, unlike the others.
Yep. This was the very last one from
Yep,
STIC
correct.
Panel 2 that came to me on 2 months, 2.5 months after the
Correct.
after the hearing, after the panel meeting, and basically says, according to NGS, they want it signed today. And I signed it saying, when I looked at it, and it had no Fitzpatrick on there, I said in my note, happy to support this on the basis of those that came before the panel.
Yeah, and look, that's your evidence
That's,
on that
you know,
point
that's-
has been precise and clear, Mr.
That's
Smith.
precise. I mean, I'm,
You are, and look, again, I'm only
totally
asking you.
completely precise and open and honest, because I saw this man, panel 1, who could have done the job, and he could have done the job. And maybe if others who were looking at it, who had to make the final decision, which wasn't me, consider the broader context, you wouldn't be here today, would you? You would have been, according to the broad-based strategy, put a very senior person in there and had business capability into that role. That's what was expected by people like me. That's what happened in every other process that was entered into on this strategy that was formulated back in 2019. That's what happened, but not on this occasion.
And can I just put that to you very directly, Mr. Smith, faced with the choice of Mr. Barilaro or Mr. Fitzpatrick, looking at it now, who would you have chosen?
Well, in retrospect, I probably wouldn't have signed knowing what we subsequently saw.
And you've made that clear?
Yeah, and that therefore Fitzpatrick was orphaned and probably should have been considered.
You say...
He was in the first panel that they made a different decision, their decision, not my decision. But if you're asking me what I thought and what I think today, knowing what I know, hearing what I've heard, and just being fair, what a mess.
Well, I agree with that, but I'm asking a specific question. Knowing what you know, sitting here today, who would you have chosen, Fitzpatrick or Barilaro?
I think Fitzpatrick. I thought it's about capability and it was politically sensible to choose someone in accord with the broad-based strategy that the Treasurer himself, when he was Treasurer, had set it up.
Thank you.
And look, I only have 1 or 2 more questions left, I think. Firstly, do you feel like Mr. Fitzpatrick was disrespected?
Sorry, he was.
Disrespected.
I feel sympathy with him and I feel as though I'm in the same rowing boat as him.
Disrespected.
I'm not that sensitive, I've been around.
Indeed. Look, the only other questions I had, and this is only literally just to close out the line of questioning Mr. Smith, but in the final report again, reference is made to the reliance on the referees as being the factor as well. It's fair to say that that's not necessarily an accurate view of the panels.
Well, yeah, it's not determinate. It's certainly influential. There's no doubt about that. They're eminent, and I've seen the work in the past of Gary Barnes, who was go way back when he was in the Northern Territory government. I was minister there once a long time ago. They're very capable and astute people, the 3 of them. So they were influential, but I wouldn't say, as I'd said earlier quite forcefully, that you don't make a decision just on the referees. You might for some jobs at some levels, but this was a very substantial position which required careful consideration of referees and other aspects, and they've certainly taken into account. It would have been disrespectful not to have taken them into account, but to say that was the determinant, even though it might be written in there, something that I wouldn't have written.
Yeah. The head review just says that you had no discussions about the Sticks America's role with panel members after the interviews. So there was never any discussion after February, correct?
Not that I recall, no. And or with the department people. I've known the department people for a good while, and some of them go back a long way, and they're really, really capable, and they work very, very hard in elevating trade and investment in New South Wales. And you got to say that, a bit like the people gathered in this room, they're dedicated to broad-based community uplift on behalf of the state. So do my bit to be of assistance.
Some of us are, Mr. Smith.
Huh?
Some of us in this room are. But yes.
I'll go on. Yeah. Take a collective pat on the back when it's offered. That you'll learn that becomes important.
Indeed. I'm just going to check with my colleagues, but I'm complete.
I think you've been clear on this, Mr. Smith, but I just do want to revisit it. In your time, over the period we've discussed, did any minister or did any minister's office speak to you about candidates for these roles? Did anyone say to you, this person would be good for one of these jobs?
Not that I recall in the sense that, Warwick, you're a panel member, this guy would be really good, he's going to come before you and, smile benignly or what have you. I never had anything like that. There was a trade minister, a member of the upper house, he's not in the house anymore, who I thought was a really good trade minister of the National Party. I'm forgetting his name now.
Niall Blair.
Yeah, but,
Niall Blair.
A well-regarded member of the House.
yeah, he was. He was a very good trade minister too. He really worked hard at it. We talked about, Warwick Smith's pet hobby, bring it up, elevate, and who are the sort of people that you would want. I think over dinner one night with a couple of other colleagues, we had that chat. So names thrown around, but when you advertise and you put it NGS on the case and they go seek it out, it becomes a far more formalised and people have to put pen to paper and put an application in. That becomes the biting moment. It doesn't always happen that they actually put it in, but you want to direct a minister's mind or a secretary's mind or a recruiter's mind to some potential people. You do that, but as for this person is there, they're really the best, you need to support them. I didn't have those interfaces with anybody. Look, past people know me, can be prickly, yeah.
Did you have any in a similar vein? Did you have any conversations about specific candidates with Secretary Pratt or Secretary Brown outside the panel processes?
Well, I don't know Secretary Brown very well. I think she's capable, but no.
Okay.
I've listened very carefully. Thank you for coming today, and I've listened very carefully to your reflections on this process. I'm interested, though, from your perspective and your experience, do you think that politicians or ex-politicians are the right fit for these jobs? And under, it sounds to me that very much you think that, business people with a lot of international experience are the right people for the role. I'm just interested in you, at the end of all of this, is your preference that you actually have business people rather than politicians in these roles?
Well, I left the federal parliament 24 years ago and went in as a very young person and stayed there 15, 17 years on and off. My sense is that the political life is a life that can be a great contributor in the business world and for communities in a post-political environment. It always depends on the individual. So you never would have, in my view, a blanket no.
No, and I'm absolutely not asking you that. That's not what I'm putting
where,
to you.
where those skills, because some jobs in politics are more deeply immersed in the intricacies of running businesses and so on, and lifting states might have more appropriateness than some others. And then it might depend on what they do in a post-political life. But to just come out of political life and be rescued straight into a job that you may not fully be appropriate for is not a good thing, because then it diminishes those roles and it diminishes the political process and those that participate in politics. But there's been some great political people that have gone into roles internationally and domestically, and to consul general roles and governors roles and so on, have all done well. Not everyone does, but many do. Going the other way, business going into politics, there's been more singular celebrated failures on that path than it has on the other direction. So my sense, through you, Madam Chair, to the member who asked the question, that you need to maintain flexibility and look for capability. It's a bit like Section 10. You're looking at capability, appropriateness, qualification, and if they tick a lot of those boxes and they meet the broader criteria of whatever the strategy is, then yes, you would say yes. I mean, names. Will Hodgman, the Premier of Tasmania, is in Singapore, first class. Gray, former federal member, is in Ireland, doing a great job. O'Farrell's in India.
But they're ambassadorial roles. I mean, it's really this issue about the trade roles in particular.
Yeah, trade
and
roles.
They were very much set up with the job description of having, very clear criteria that I think we now can argue that particularly Mr. Barilaro didn't meet.
I come to that in a half second, just to preface it by saying I've seen more in the federal area where people have gone into similar type roles in consulates and trade roles, and in the US, and we've had 5 or 6, and Chicago, San Francisco, Texas, whole range of former federal politicians have done those roles, Liberal and Labor, and I've been involved in some of the processes of selection. And they've all done well, and it's sometimes really important to make sure that the staff support is strong. In terms of the former member for Queanbeyan, look, yeah, well, he interviewed well. He could have done okay, but there were others that had deeper international experience and offshore experience that was deep and capable, met criteria, were personable, could have engaged. But then you've got a former premier who sits in Austrade office in New York right now. Would have been novel, I suppose, having a premier and a former deputy premier each side of, 6th Avenue. But you make your choice. I'm not asked to make that choice. I was asked to make some recommendations, and I recommended 2 at the first panel, and I would have recommended of 2, possibly 3, if he'd been given an interview on the second panel. And then those that make the decision need to make the decision, and the confusion about who was to make the decision only muddies the waters even further. So when you're like me and you think, well, you can only do what you can do. And that's what I did, with open mind, transparency, and quite capable of articulating, saying things as I see them.
Thank you.
And I do.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I think that's the end of questions from the opposition and crossbench. I would think the government has a few questions.
Yes,
Mr.
we do
Farlow?
indeed.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Mr. Smith, for being here with us this afternoon. I think you've acquitted yourself admirably today in terms of your role in the process. But just wanting to turn to...
Sorry,
I
missed the interjection.
In case you need a reference. Mr. Barlow and Mr. Graham will give you one.
But just wanting to turn now to the positions themselves, and you talked about this being your hobby horse, so to speak, in terms of the importance of the positions or the importance of trade. You mentioned in your evidence that you thought that New South Wales was behind the 8 ball when it came to Queensland and Victoria on the trade front. So do you think these positions are important?
Look, I really... in a long experience, believe that New South Wales was always underdone in the field, and that as to physical presence, as to the depth of the staff support for the people that were in Japan and Korea and the Philippines, and all those markets are very important to us, let alone China. And I ran China for ANZ, I ran it for Thailand for ANZ. I'm busy up there with Macquarie, still busy in North Asia. So the New South Wales, for its size, was totally underdone. So, just having all this foci doesn't throw away make the plea that this was a very good strategy. This was a strategy that had long been delayed. We had changes in premiers a little bit more quickly than would ordinarily take place. We went from O'Farrell to Baird to Varadjikli and to Paratate. I mean, it's only been surpassed by the number of times we've had different prime ministers in recent times. So my sense is that that this is really, really important, that they run and they conjunctionally are in markets and backfill some of the work that Austrade does, that the Diplomatic Corps does, and that our overall presence is really important. Now, the fundamental point that I always argue is that a country like ours that is built on trade, relies on trade, needs to never ever relax both its presentation on services opportunity, attraction of investment, merchandise trade. 70% of our wool, much of it from New South Wales, leaves this country now in unprocessed form in containers to 5 specific cities in China, worth nearly $5 billion a year. These are important issues. The merchandise trade, I'm talking about gas and oil, and not oil, iron ore and coal, and these are very important matters. And New South Wales can't afford to be, because of the diversity of its economy, left behind. You've got 9 universities in the Sydney Basin. The spread of the student intake prior to COVID was weighed heavily toward the Chinese. We need to diversify. How do we diversify? We need to be in markets. We need to have relationships. We need to have cultural exchanges. It's all a complex matrix, and it's best done by people that are committed. And there's a lot of good people I've seen, and the people that we've mentioned today in the department, they're really committed. They need resources. They need to be rewarded, and they need to have an elevation of commitment from government. And that's what I've argued for quite a long time. And these roles were and are and continue to be really important. So those selected that are in place, some of them will take a while to adjust. Especially coming out of business, it's a bit of a shock to come into some of the, your bureaucracy issues, a different mindset and so on. But that interface and that mixing is really, really good for potential outcomes. And people don't always get the jobs they want, but that happens, and accidents and bad process, you call it out, you fix it, you get on with it, and you build a much more vibrant and bigger economy that focuses on trade, which is the fundamental cornerstone of the Australian growth story, not just New South Wales. In the size and proportion, we're not just an iron ore state. We have much more to us. And therefore, the diversity and capability sets you need to be in markets and new markets and the digitisation of the world that's taking place and what comes out. Anyway, I can rave on forever. I used to bore people.
I'm sure you can. Well, I might ask you to rave on a little bit more, Mr. Smith, by asking you, it's often suggested that this role can be done by Austrade, that a state representative can be housed in an Austrade office. What's your view in terms of that compared to an Investment New South Wales
Look, I did that
sole
review.
representative?
It's on that list if they distributed that CV. You saw I did a major overview of Austrade, along with a whole range of other federal departments over the last 10 years. The embedding doesn't always work, the embedding within an Austrade office, but in Indonesia recently, at the invitation of the Prime Minister to go to his first visit to Jakarta, they're embedded there. The New South Wales people are embedded there with Austrade. That worked quite well, probably a little bit more elevation over time. But some markets it works well, other markets doesn't. And in London, apart from Queensland, I think they all share Australia House, partly because you get a better rent deal. So all those things come into it. Where were they going to go in the US? I think they were going to go and share with Griner in Australia. So look, those things are worked out on a case-by-case basis. But you've got to remember they come with different perspectives. A state person comes with a different perspective. We're trying to actually pitch to a Japanese company to get them to open up an office here. We could probably do it far more quickly and far more focused as, you're coming out of the Treasurer's office and you can talk about what benefits we might be able to bring that you can't necessarily get if you're an Austrade person because they don't run that sort of capability. It could be payroll, it could be land tax, it could be all sorts of things. So I see there as a complementary role, but it's the collective effort that I've always argued is in the benefit for the nation, and that a state that lags, doesn't have a presence, doesn't take it seriously, will get the result that you expect to see, and that is an underperformance and underinvestment, and that's letting our community down when you are a trade nation. That's the pitch.
Thank you very much, Mr. Smith. Mr. Barrett, do you have anything further?
No, I don't anymore. Thank you.
And Mr. Paulos?
Great. Excellent. All right. Well, that is the end of our hearing today and the end of this session with you, Mr. Smith. So really appreciate you making the time to come this afternoon and give your evidence. The committee really appreciates it. The Secretariat will be in touch with anything, if you did take any questions or notice, or if it needs any clarification from the...
I think there was one.
Yes, that's right. And we'll be in touch with you regarding that. So thank you again. And that is the end of today's hearing for everybody tuning in. Thank you.